Chapter 90. This what was war. Many of the Mountly disciples had once served on the front lines and participated in the war against the demons. But in terms of understanding of war, no one present could compare to Zhixio. Guan Feibai and the others turned to Qiushanjun. Whether it was in cultivation or in life, whenever they encountered a difficult question, they would seek eldest brother's guidance. This was a habit they had developed over the years. Qiushanjun said, "Don't look at me. I also don't know, and I don't intend to know." Guan Feibai and the others were rather surprised, but Go Hanshi was shocked because he understood the meaning hidden in these words. Before Nank left, she had said that they would meet again there. Could it be that senior brother does not intend to go there? The morning light gradually brightened, revealing the true appearance of the grassland. The mountain range had left a wound on its surface that was several dozen li long, a rather spectacular sight to behold. The massive paper kite rode the morning wind into the distance. It was a mystery where it had been hidden last night or how it had been taken out. The white crane was very curious. It flapped its wings and followed the kite for 10-some li. Only when Xiao Zhang, tied to the kite, could no longer endure the awkwardness of being stared at and began cursing did Su Yurong call it back. Wang Po also prepared to leave, not chatting too much with Chen Changshan. He was as straightforward as Xiao Zhang, because everyone knew that they would meet again very soon. He had left the red cloud Qilin behind, but he did not say whether it was his idea or the idea of that person in Luoyang. Chen Changshan guessed that it was the latter. The spring sun was warm, and the grass grew extremely quickly. As Chen Changshan and Su Yurong walked deeper into the grassland, they discovered a few traces left behind by the elves. In the garden of Zhou, he had believed her to be an elf girl bent on restoring her country. Later on, when he returned the swords of the garden of Zhou to the sex of the world, the Pope had asked him what reward he wanted. One of his conditions was that he wanted this grassland, with the intention of helping her fulfill her final wish. Later on, he realized that this was a misunderstanding, and he also knew that the elves had moved to the great western continent and had no intention of returning to the eastern continent. This grassland became his and Su Yurong's property. From a certain perspective, this grassland was a token of love, and it could also be understood as a betrothal gift. Arriving deep into the grassland, Chen Changshan spread his left hand in the sunlight, revealing a black stone pearl in his palm. Accompanied by howling gales, rumbling thunder, and a faint stench, the spring sun was obscured and the world was gloomy. Tens of thousands of demonic beasts appeared on the grassland like a black tide. These demon beasts, who were famous for being violent and aggressive, actually didn't move. They obediently lay on the ground, not even daring to breathe too loudly. These monsters came from the Garden of Zhou. According to the agreement Chen Changshan had made with the monsters, those that were willing to leave the Garden of Zhou were now being sent to the plains of the elf race. The number of monsters that were willing to leave made up roughly a third of the monsters in the Garden of Zhou. The monster bull and mountain-toppling fiend did not come out. They were already used to life in the plains of the unsetting sun, and they had seen the cruelty of the real world several centuries ago, so they were not curious. The earth monkey had come out again. It knelt at the very front of the monster horde, the position closest to Chen Changshan. It incessantly kissed the dirt at his feet. "Remember not to leave this grassland," Chen Changshan said to the earth monkey. This was also part of the agreement. The grassland that had once belonged to the elf race was extremely vast, and there were even 2 long mountain ranges on its borders. If not for the unbearable winter and the heavy fiendish qi, it would have never been so desolate. But to these monsters, these were all difficulties that could be overcome. Have you ever thought about what sort of trouble will appear when the monsters multiply and their numbers continue to increase? Su Yurong gazed at the scattered monsters, a complicated expression in her eyes. That's a matter for several thousand years from now. There's no need to consider a problem so far in the future. Chen Changshan thought it over, then added, "I probably won't be able to live until then." Su Yurong replied, "It's precisely because you'll already be dead by then that we need to consider this problem. Besides you, these monsters won't listen to the orders of any other human. Chun Changsheng sighed. These words are truly too reasonable. Su Yurong added, if these monsters are used to fight against the wolf cavalry of the demon race, they should be extremely useful. Chun Changsheng had nothing to say to the previous question. He was rather emotional, but he wanted to seriously answer this question. This is a war between us and the demons. There's no reason for them to participate. It's very dangerous. Su Yurong asked, shouldn't we use all our strength in a war against the demons? Chun Changsheng replied, I don't think so. It's fine as long as we do our best. Last night, Mountain Man Yinji had stopped Mountain Man Jingbua and Ichuan from taking revenge for him and had them leave on their own. He had done his best for the demons, and after death, he would have the face to see his teacher, so there was no need for him to do anything more. Chun Changsheng had never thought about whether he would have the face to see his martial uncle and Archbishop Mei Lisha after death. He only needed to consider whether his actions could convince himself, because he cultivated the Tao of following his heart. In the end, he came to a conclusion very similar to Mountain Man Yinji's. It was fine as long as he did his best. As long as he truly did his best, his heart would be at ease. What was doing his best? He could give up his life for it, but he didn't need to give up anything more. Like changing the way he interacted with the world. This was even more important than living. Su Yurong thought for a while, then said, even if you really think this, you shouldn't say it. He was the Pope of the human race. His every word and action would have a massive influence on those zealous believers, and could even affect the course of this war. Chun Changsheng understood what she meant and sighed. I'll only say it in front of all of you. As his status and reputation grew, there were many things that were inconvenient for him to do. For instance, he could no longer sit with Tang 36 on the great banyan tree and pluck out the bark to knock out those fat carps in the lake. He could have Xinyuan stew them for an hour with ginger and green peppers, and then finally throw in 10 blue lobsters to feast on. It was written very clearly in the rules of the Orthodox Academy that fishing, smashing fish, and any other form of harming fish were strictly forbidden. Su Moyu enforced these rules with extreme strictness, and, crucially, there were so many teachers and students watching. 10 blue lobsters was far too extravagant. Tang 36 could eat them, but he, the Pope, could not. Su Yurong knew who he meant by all of you. Besides her, there were those people in the Orthodox Academy. Even if some of them had already left the Orthodox Academy and returned to White Emperor City or Mount Li. They were also Chun Changsheng's most trusted and closest people. Tang 36 will probably only feel that it's a pity that these monsters can't be used to their full potential, but Zhishio will definitely be furious. In that wolf cub's view, anything that can help kill an enemy should be done. Your actions seem benevolent, magnanimous, and broad-minded, but in truth, they're just stupid. Su Yurong's face was brimming with ridicule. It was still as beautiful as a painting. Perhaps. Chun Changsheng bitterly smiled. I feel like you also think this way. Su Yurong ignored him and turned to walk out. Chun Changsheng suddenly thought of something and called the earth monkey back to say a few words. The wolf tribe currently lived in the northeast corner of the plains. Although they were still very far away, he was worried that the two sides would meet in the future, so he gave them a few words of warning. Zhishio had used money to buy that plane from him. 3 years ago, when they were all celebrating the new year at Mount Li, Zhishio had suddenly made this request. It was truly rather shocking. Chun Changsheng was naturally unwilling to accept money, but Zhishio was very insistent. He took out all the money he had accumulated over the years. Although it was not enough to buy a plane, it was still a considerable sum. Even Tang 36 clicked his tongue in wonder. It was only then that everyone learned that Zhishio had been expelled from the tribe by the Council of Elders when he was very young, but many of the women and friends of the tribe had been secretly helping him. He wanted to repay this kindness, wanted to move the tribe out of the bitter cold of the snowy plains to a better place. In the past few years, he had lived extremely frugally, desperately killing enemies in exchange for military merit, all for the sake of saving enough money. Now that he had finally done it, how could those old fellows in the Council of Elders dare to show him any disrespect? In the grand examination, Tang 36 had used half a roast chicken to bribe Zhishio. In the following battle, Zheshio had battled Go Hanshi, who was one cultivation level higher than him, until the heavens and earth darkened. He had played a crucial role in Chen Changxing's final victory, but he had also paid an extremely heavy price. When he was carried out, his entire body was covered in blood. But when everyone was incomparably moved, he was only thinking of one thing: more money. When he thought of those old scenes, Chen Changsheng was deeply moved. He thought to himself, I wonder how Zheshio is doing in Mount Li. The war between the humans and demons is about to begin. He will definitely head north, but Nank, the smile on his face, gradually faded. He had a very clear understanding of Nank's condition. For many reasons, he had not been very fond of staying in the capital in the past few years. He would often travel around and go to Mount Li many times. Besides the people of the Orthodox Academy, only those fellows from the Mount Li sword sect dared to not treat him as the Pope. This made him feel very comfortable. Every year, his senior brother would go to Luoyang to celebrate the new year. Other than 1 year in Wenshui, he would spend the rest of his time with Su Yorong at Mount Li. In the past few years, he had gone to Mount Li no less than 30 times. But every time Nank saw him, her innocent face would reveal the most sincere smile, and she would grab onto his sleeve, unwilling to let go. Even when he slept at night, she insisted on sleeping in his room, even if it was a mattress on the floor, even if Su Yorong's expression was very indifferent. This was a habit she had developed in Sloping Cliff Horse Farm, and Xiu Shanjun was well aware of this past. Nank was still somewhat dazed, but she trusted Chen Changxing very much and even felt attached to him. She was well aware of who treated her the best. Chen Changxing truly did treat her very well. The two of them were like true brother and sister. Chen Changxing was well aware of her illness. He had left her at Mount Li in the hopes that the sect master of the Mount Li sword sect could cure her. He had always been very concerned about the progress of her illness. At the new year this year, he knew that she was about to recover. This also meant that she was about to wake up. When the time came, what would she do? What should he do? After a very long period of contemplation, he left a letter for Go Hanshi. He said that if Nank showed signs of waking up, he should open the letter. He wondered if the letter was still intact at this time. The red cloud Qilin could travel several thousand li in a day, and the white crane was the fastest immortal bird. If they had wanted to, Chen Changsheng and Su Yorong could have flown straight back to the capital, but they had stopped midway. Perhaps it was because a scarlet flame had appeared in the sky up ahead. This flame was not a real existence, but a condensation of countless strands of blood qi and killing intent. Only those who had broken into the divine domain could see it with the naked eye. Chen Changsheng and Su Yorong were still some distance from that threshold, but their statuses were special. They were saints, and they carried heavenly tome monoliths with them, so they could sense it. The plains were filled with people. From the sky, they looked like dense black dots, like ants, but this was not the case. The white crane looked at the invisible flame, fear appearing in its eyes. The red cloud Qilin, on the other hand, became excited, flapping its wings even faster. The army of the Tsong province army had gathered on the plains, and they were currently undergoing intense training. From time to time, powerful qis would soar into the sky from the army. Some were clearly the work of array masters, while others were cultivators skilled in controlling swords. Chen Changsheng could even see the inferno shroud of the South's Triple Yang sect in the southwest corner of the army. This array was truly terrifying. Not even he and Su Yorong could face it head-on. Finally, Chen Changsheng saw the general at the very front. This general had an extremely powerful qi. He was actually an upper-level star condensation expert, presumably a divine general of the Tsong province army. A gale blew through the plains, causing the great Zhou banners to flap in the wind and the clothes of the soldiers. The general's sleeve swayed in the wind. He had actually lost an arm. He was Shui. In the coup of the Mausoleum of Books, his older brother, Divine General Shui Xingchuan, was poisoned to death by Zhou Tong. Soon after, the imperial court and the military carried out a cruel purge, and he was naturally not spared. He was stripped of his military post and imprisoned in the alley of the Northern Military Department. It was only on the day that Chun Changsheng, Mou, and Zhuxiu killed Zhou Tong that he saw the light of day once more. Later on, the Li Palace intervened, and he was released, but he was not allowed to stay in the capital or return to Song province. The imperial court demoted him to Huang province to serve as a deputy commander. Fortunately, he encountered a rather decent commanding official there. Every day, he would travel the rivers and mountains, compose poems, and though he could not be described as happy, he passed his days in peace. Only when the storm suddenly arrived and master and disciple battled in the Orthodox Academy, turning the Maple Forest Pavilion into ruins, did the situation finally change. Afterwards, His Majesty began to implement new policies, bringing back a group of old officials from the previous government. Shui was among them, sent to Star Caesar Academy to teach. In his 3 years at Star Caesar Academy, Shui diligently studied the art of war and made a major breakthrough in his cultivation. Unknowingly, he had reached the upper level of star condensation. The emperor transferred him to Song province, where he took over his older brother's position and became the divine general of the Song province army. There was a muffled slap. Shui knelt on the ground, his knees shattering the stone floor. His eyes were slightly red, and his body was trembling. The calm and imposing manner he had displayed when commanding the tens of thousands of soldiers outside the city had vanished long ago. Young Madame Shui, together with her 2 sons of 8 or 9, knelt behind him. The Shui clan was extremely strict. The 2 young masters did not understand why their father had lost his composure, but they did not dare say anything. Young Madame Shui, on the other hand, had guessed at the arrival of this young man and woman. He knelt willingly, but he was worried that he was not being respectful enough. To be continued. Chapter 91. Shui was so excited not because Chun Changsheng had freed him from the bitter prison and restored him, but because he was grateful that Chun Changsheng had buried his brother's body, participated in the memorial service, taken care of his widowed sister-in-law, nephew, and niece, and even protected Song province. After several years, the Song province army headquarters had regained the glory of Shui Xingchuan, becoming one of the most important military headquarters of the Great Zhou, alongside Blue Pass and Snow Pass precisely because he had the assistance of his old subordinates. Chun Changsheng said, "There's no need to be so polite. Rise." Shui knew his personality, so he stood up and indicated for his wife to take the child and leave. Before leaving, young Madame Shui nervously glanced at him, thinking, is there no need to prepare a banquet? Will the 2 saints be unhappy? Shui did not notice his wife's expression. All his attention was on the red cloud qilin that Chun Changsheng was pulling. Someone had me bring it to you, hoping that in the near future, you will be able to ride it into Xiulao City. Chun Changsheng continued, on that day, I think that divine General Shui Xingchuan will be extremely happy. Shui took the reins and said, be at ease, I will definitely take good care of it. The red cloud qilin was extremely intelligent and had already recognized him. It lowered its head and lightly touched his cheek. Shui was rather moved, but when he thought about how His Majesty had probably asked the Pope to bring the red cloud qilin, he also felt rather uneasy. He seriously said to Chun Changsheng, I only know that His Majesty bestowed it to me. There is only one meaning to this sentence, and that was loyalty. This was also why he had his family appear and kowtow to Chun Changsheng. Although it was the emperor who had appointed him as the divine general of the Song province army headquarters, he was keenly aware of who the true benefactor of the Shui clan was. The Shui clan was Chun Changsheng's followers. Whether it was the Shui clan in Song province or the Shui clan on the road of peace in the capital, as long as the Shui clan existed, as long as he was alive, the Song province army headquarters would only follow the lead of the Li Palace. Even if the imperial court and the orthodoxy once more came into conflict, he would unhesitatingly lead his tens of thousands of soldiers to stand behind Chun Changsheng. Although it seemed that His Majesty and the Pope had a deep affection for each other, that such a thing was simply impossible, who could say what would happen in the future? When Emperor Taizu led his troops out of Tianliang County, could those young princes have imagined that so much blood would flow in the 100 Herb Garden a few decades later? Chen Chongqing knew that Shui had made a mistake and said, "This should be the intention of Luoyang." After hearing this, Shui was silent for a very long time. The eastern capital, Luoyang, had been quiet all these years. It did not make a sound, but there were still many people watching it. Why? Of course, it was because of the Temple of Eternal Spring. Nowadays, when people mention Luoyang, if there was no other explanation, they would refer to the Monastery of Eternal Spring and the old Taoist in the monastery. If the red cloud unicorn was really sent over by the Monastery of Eternal Spring, then the meaning behind it was very clear. This general does not dare to have any resentment. When Shui said this, he spoke very slowly, but his tone was very serious. Since he had made up his mind, he did not want the Pope to think that he was still holding back. Although saying this made him very unhappy, or perhaps it could be said that he was unwilling. You can't control what you think. You love and hate, and you have a reason to hate. So who has the right to stop you from hating? Chen Chongshang continued, but before attacking Shuilao City, we might need to temporarily forget those things. In this war, the Tsong province army under Shui, his command was naturally the main force. That person in Luoyang had returned the red cloud Qilin to Shui, he without saying a word, but it had a deeper meaning. It was precisely what Chen Chongqing had meant. As dusk deepened, Chen Chongsheng and Su Yurong did not stay to eat at the divine general's estate, choosing to leave. Now, the two of them had to share the same crane. This sort of situation had occurred many times in the past, and the white crane was already used to it, but it could sense that something was wrong with today's situation. In the hazy twilight, the plain stretched as far as the eye could see. Su Yurong was focused on the scenery. When Chen Chongqing spoke to her, she would only respond with one sentence after every 4 or 5 sentences. She seemed rather cold. The white crane recalled Xiao Zhang's words and wondered, could there really be a problem between these two? No matter how slow Chen Chongqing was, he had long ago sensed Su Yurong's coldness and knew that there truly was a problem. The problem was that he didn't know what the problem was, where the problem had come from, and even if he wanted to ask her, he didn't know where to start. The cold wind buffeted his face, but it did not make him more clear-headed. On the contrary, it made him even more confused. The white crane flew southwest, and it didn't take long for it to enter Tianliang County. As he gazed at the familiar scenery of the wasteland and the familiar city in front of him, Chen Chongsheng recalled the scene of him and Su Li fleeing for tens of thousands of li and couldn't help but feel nostalgic. Following his orders, the white crane landed in a forest outside the city. As it descended, Chen Chongqing noticed that the largest estate in the city was completely empty, its gate tightly shut. He couldn't help but wonder, could Liang Wangsun have left? Why isn't there a single person in the estate? As the white crane flew into the twilight, Chen Chongsheng and Su Yurong walked out of the dense forest on the side of the official road. Xuanyang City was an ancient city, but the southern gate seemed rather new. At the very least, it didn't seem ancient at all. Back then, your teacher blew open this city gate, and Guanshinka and Zhu Luo were badly beaten. When Chen Chongsheng thought of the events of the past, he was still rather excited, but also somewhat ashamed that he didn't know how to tell a story. He thought to himself, if it were Tang 36 telling it, it would definitely be much more wonderful. The story of that night's storm in Xuanyang City had long ago spread to the entire continent. Su Yurong already knew all the details, so there was no need for Chen Chongsheng to explain. As she gazed at the city gate and thought of her teacher, a faint smile appeared on her lips. Chen Chongsheng was somewhat gratified, thinking to himself, this arrangement really wasn't wrong. After entering Xuanyang City, they went straight to the Liang household. The gate of the Liang household was tightly shut. They used their spiritual senses to scan the place and confirm that there really was no one inside. Chen Chongsheng and Su Yurong glanced at each other, somewhat confused. Just what had happened that Liang Wangsun had actually dismissed all the servants in the estate. Upon entering the estate, they saw that famous imperial carriage and found the letter that Liang Wangsun had left behind. Liang Wangsun had a very powerful influence on the northern world of cultivators and the common people. The palace had issued several decrees inviting him to enter the court, but he had always refused. As a descendant of the previous dynasty's imperial clan, he hated the Chun imperial clan to the bone, so how could he be willing to lend a hand? They had come to Xuanyang City to persuade him. When Liang Wang's son had entered the capital to help the Tianhai Divine Empress manage the imperial design, he should have had a rather good impression of Su Yurong. Who could have expected that after Liang Wang's son received the news from the capital, he would immediately take the old and young of the estate and leave Xuanyang City, not even willing to meet with them? However, Liang Wang's son had clearly stated in the letter that it was impossible for him to help the imperial court. When he was truly needed, he would naturally appear. This single sentence was enough, not to mention the fact that there was even a name on the letter. Chen Changsheng and Su Yurong left the estate and arrived on the street. Many soldiers hurriedly walked by, their faces somewhat at a loss. The prefectural armies of the various provinces and counties were currently mobilizing their defenses and also training. Logically speaking, they should not have appeared on the battlefield, but no one knew just how many people would die this time. Even the imperial guards responsible for guarding the imperial palace were preparing to advance north at any moment, let alone them. On the battlefield, death was unavoidable, and the phrase, one after another, was a common occurrence. Chen Changsheng understood that this was inevitable, but he still felt somewhat perplexed. For the sake of his thoughts, tens of thousands of people would die. Sometimes, he would think that it was fortunate that he was the Pope and not the Emperor, or else those decrees and conscription orders would have to go through his hands. Soon after, he would feel that thinking this way was very unfair to his senior brother. He knew that his senior brother would do these things extremely well, but just like him, his senior brother also deeply disliked doing these things. The street behind the Liang household was called Four Seasons Green. It was the straightest street in the western part of Xuanyang City. There were no shops on either side, only gray stone walls. The long street was quiet. Music drifted out from some courtyard, and it seemed like someone was singing an opera. Chen Changsheng and Su Yurong followed the music. Passing through an alley, they arrived in front of an estate and saw 2 rows of red lanterns. The paper used for the lanterns was an extremely red and heavy color. It seemed to be wet, and when illuminated by the ox candles inside, it looked like blood, somewhat dazzling to the eye. Su Yurong glanced at the lanterns, her elegant brows creasing as if she was thinking of something. The music came from within the estate. Chen Changsheng and Su Yurong walked in, but no one stopped them. Upon entering the estate was an enormous stone platform, paved with large blocks of gray stone. They were unpolished and not exquisite, and coupled with the burning torches all around, it seemed rather like a battlefield on the wasteland. In front of them was a stage, and on the stage burned tallow candles as thick as a child's arm. The flames illuminated the white paper-covered back wall, making it seem like daytime. A man was currently singing an opera, dressed in a red dress and wearing extremely gaudy makeup. He did not use his high-collared clothes to intentionally cover his throat, nor did he intentionally suppress his voice. He sang in a rather hoarse and exquisite manner, rather moving. Without any warning, the music came to a screeching halt. The man turned to Chen Changsheng and asked, "Sir, what do you think of my opera?" Tonight, not many people had come to listen to the opera, only 10 some. They were sitting in front of the stage, and from their attire and demeanor, they were probably the leading figures of Xuanyang City. Hearing the man on the stage speak, the crowd turned and saw Chen Changsheng and Su Yurong. They couldn't help but be somewhat surprised. Today, Liang Hongzhuang had come to the estate to entertain himself, and he had even invited the best troupe in Lanling City. He was still singing the famous Spring Night song, playing the part of a charming and lovely bride. Just as he was singing excitedly, his eyebrows flying and his eyes softening, he suddenly saw that young man and woman walk in from outside the estate. He thought to himself, "I've finally arrived. I've never really listened to opera, but I think it's pretty good." Chen Changsheng thought it over, then added, "It seems a little different from the opera in the capital. When I was little, I went to the Luling estate to learn opera. Their singing style is a little strange, but it's nice to listen to." Liang Hongzhuang said, I hear that it's a singing style from the great western continent, but I don't know if it's true or not. The people present were all leading figures of Xianyang City. Seeing Chun Changsheng and Su Yorong's appearances, especially the latter, they very quickly guessed at their identities. The tea table toppled to the ground and the chairs overturned. Under the lead of the archbishop and the mayor of Xianyang City, the crowd solemnly bowed. Chun Changsheng waved his hand, indicating that they should rise, but he had no intention of speaking with them. As a result, the crowd could only respectfully stand to the side, not daring to make a sound. It was a matter from 10-odd years ago. Countless people of the Liang estate died. My father also died, and my big brother ran away from home. In those days, my life was very bitter. The imperial court did not like our clan, so naturally no one liked us. Now that I have no elders to protect me, who would be polite to me, at the most bitter times, I didn't even have food to eat, so I thought to myself that I had to find a way to support myself. My father liked to listen to opera, and I also liked to listen to it. I was familiar with this line of work, so I walked this path. At the time, I had no choice. Did you all just go to the estate? At the time, even the estate was occupied. Hearing Liang Hongzhuang's words, the expressions of those important figures of Xianyang City subtly changed. Could it be that something is going to happen tonight? Liang Hongzhuang then fell silent for a very long time. He originally had many things he wanted to say. At the time of the incident, the people who had seized the power and wealth of the Liang estate had been right in front of him, precisely these leading figures of Xianyang City. If not for Liang Wangsuan's outstanding talent, the fact that he had become an expert of the proclamation of liberation at such a young age, and the fact that he had established a relationship with the palace, how could these people have lowered their heads and admitted defeat? Even so, these people still relied on the imperial court's wariness of the Liang estate and the power of the Tianhai clan to suppress the Liang estate from retaliating. The ones who had truly occupied the Liang estate were not these people. To these important figures, this sort of behavior would be far too unsightly. Thinking of the chaotic state of the estate when he returned 3 years later, Liang Hongzhuang sighed. He took out a case from his sleeve and threw it to Chun Changsheng. Inside the case was half of the estate of the Liang estate, which could be used for military expenses. "I want a drink," Liang Hongzhuang suddenly said. After a moment, a woman carrying a bowl of wine walked onto the stage. Her footsteps hurried. Liang Hongzhuang took the bowl and drained it in one gulp, then threw the bowl to the ground. With a clap, it shattered into pieces. He cast a sidelong glance at the sky, his eyes filled with indescribable contempt and sorrow. Walking off the stage, he kicked off his cloud boots, threw away his headscarf, and walked into the darkness. The woman anxiously yelled, "Third young master, where are you going?" "My apologies to everyone. I've caused trouble for everyone. I've caused trouble for everyone. I admit my wrongs. I admit my cowardice. I admit my beating. I just have to trouble everyone to move to Weibo to criticize and educate me. After all, the book review section is a place to discuss books. I've troubled you. Thank you." There is a story between Liang Hongzhuang and that woman, roughly similar to Fan Xian and Donger, except that the former is a tragedy. Many of the words used to describe Liang Hongzhuang in this chapter were copied from the first time he appeared. I really like the description in that chapter. Chapter 92. Liang Wang's son would not participate in this war, at least at the beginning. However, he had to show his attitude, so he left behind a message and a name. This name represented half of the Liang household's property, as well as Liang Hongzhuang, a star condensation expert. Liang Wang's son had already received an appointment from the military through MOU. Liang Hongzhuang wanted to go to Blue Pass. He would definitely become a general and stay in a safer place on the battlefield. However, a general would die in battle, not to mention that this would be a long and drawn-out battle. Who could guarantee that he would come back alive? Moreover, Liang Hongzhuang knew his own temperament. He was certain that it would be very difficult for him to return alive. This was the so-called death. However, before that, there were still some unfulfilled wishes, such as those who were still alive. In the last few years, he had developed a very good relationship with the governor of Xianyang City, the archbishop, and the others. Although his relationship with Liang Wang's son was very ordinary, he was still a member of the Liang household, so the important figures of Xuanyang City had to give him some face. All of this was for today. Liang Hongzhuang had already made preparations to kill all of these people tonight. He knew what these people liked, so he made a lot of arrangements between tallow candles, painted walls, red lanterns, and food. Not to mention, there were still several assassins from the Heavenly Secrets Pavilion hidden in the darkness of the night. When she saw the red lantern, Su Yurong felt a flash of killing intent, which was why she frowned. In the end, Liang Hongzhuang changed his mind. Even after a long time, no one knew why he had changed his mind. In the coming summer, there would be a battle to break out of the encirclement, and he would die under the hammer of the 9th Demon General. Sitting in front of the table and looking at his own face in the mirror, Qin Changsheng thought about the unfinished story of Liang Hongzhuang and sighed. A rustling sound came from behind him. He looked back and saw a graceful figure behind the gauze curtain. He could vaguely see the faint flower pattern on her white undergarments. He hurriedly walked over and tidied up the bedding on the floor so that it wouldn't get in the way. Su Yurong got off the bed and washed her face and rinsed her mouth. She put on an unlined shirt and walked to the window without buttoning it. The morning breeze blew through the window and landed on her face, ruffling her slightly damp black hair. Spring sunshine also entered the room. The room was filled with spring. Seeing this scene, Qin Changsheng naturally thought of many years ago. It was also a bright and beautiful day in this inn. He shouted to all of Xuanyang City, "Mount Li's junior marshal Uncle Su Li is here." Wind and rain suddenly arrived, and a series of bloody battles ensued. Today, he did not need to shout these words, and being with Su Yurong was naturally much more enjoyable than being with Su Li. The most important difference was that the human race at the time was divided, whether it was between the new and conservative factions of the Orthodoxy or between the Tianhai Divine Empress and the Chun Imperial clan. And the greatest of these cracks was between the North and the South. Even a benevolent person like the Pope wholeheartedly wanted to kill Su Li, let alone anyone else. It was completely different now. Luoyang took the initiative to send the Red Cloud Qilin to Tsong province. Shuehe remained silent. The entire Liang household moved away, but left behind half of their wealth. In the end, Liang Hongzhuang did not kill anyone and directly went to Blue Pass. There was still hatred and cracks, but it was nothing. The current human race was unprecedentedly united. Everyone knew that the Great Zhou dynasty was about to launch a northern expedition. After several hundred years, the human race would once more launch an attack on the demons. This time, their goal was extremely clear: to complete the grand undertaking that Emperor Taizong's generation had not been able to complete, to capture Xuelao City, thoroughly defeat the demons, and then subjugate them. In the face of this sort of war, nothing was important, whether it was the personal grudges from 1,000 years ago or the clash of ideals. It was like this for thousands of generations. Su Yurong did not turn her head. She squinted her eyes and gazed at the spring sunshine of Xuanyang City. She was like a rabbit that had just woken up, rather cute. "You've stayed in White Emperor City for so long. Just how did the negotiations go?" Last year, on the winter solstice, the Orthodoxy's diplomatic mission had left the capital and traveled tens of thousands of li to the demi-human domain. Pope Qin Changsheng had been in the convoy. Only the day before yesterday, when spring had already arrived and Xiao Zhang was about to return, did Qin Changsheng ride the white crane and leave. 100-some days had passed. Qin Changsheng said, "Although there are precedents for everything, it's still been several hundred years. Getting the White Emperor to agree to an alliance is not difficult, but the details are very troublesome." Su Yurong said, "It seems even more difficult than fishing on a red river." As she said this, there was no expression on her face, but everyone knew what sort of emotion she wanted to express. Qin Changsheng froze at these words. He vaguely understood why she had been so cold from the night before until today, but for a moment, he didn't know how to explain it. In the next moment, he suddenly recalled Tang 36's advice. His expression flickered as he yelled, "Look, there's a kite in the sky." Su Yurong arched her brows and gazed out the window. All she saw was a clear blue sky with nothing else in it. Qin Changsheng quickly stepped forward and hugged her from behind. His arms encircled her, perfectly fitting. I won't let go. The entire continent is so united. So how can we be divided? The confluence of North and South, the unity of the orthodoxy, all depends on us. Just do as I say, or perhaps I'll submit to you. Su Yurong arched her brows, but she said nothing. This should have been an emotion of loathing, but why did it seem endlessly bashful under the light of spring? The morning drizzle once more descended upon this old land, lonely and sheltering. 10 some li away, looking at the distant capital, the convoy was divided into 2 lines, one following the Luo River into the capital, the other heading into the distance. The distance of the capital was not some other place in the continent, but Luoyang. This was a very poetic way of saying it. Many years ago, when he was traveling from Xining village to the capital, Qin Changsheng had once passed by Luoyang, but he had not entered the city. It was not easy to stay in Luoyang, and the inns there were publicly acknowledged to be expensive. This was Qin Changsheng's first time entering Luoyang, and also his first time entering the monastery of Eternal Spring. This was the first time in 10 years that he had seen his master, Shang Xingzhou. After the Battle of the Orthodox Academy, Shang Xingzhou had retreated to Luoyang and taken up residence in the monastery of Eternal Spring. 10 years had passed since then. The past was the past, but it was not like the wind. The human race was incomparably united, but there would always be a crack between certain people and certain matters. The deepest and most important crack was naturally between Qin Changsheng and Shang Xingzhou. Shang Xingzhou had ignored politics for many years, but he was still alive, which represented a faction or perhaps a faith. The Taoists of the monastery of Eternal Spring did not obstruct him. They calmly handed over Qin Changsheng's request for an audience. So even though their monastery master had been killed 10 years ago by Lu Qing, whom Qin Changsheng had invited, they still treated Qin Changsheng with courtesy and no hatred. This sort of lack of emotion, the lack of subjective awareness, was truly terrifying. Only these Taoists could probably force Xiao Zhang into the snowy plains, right? Qin Changsheng silently thought this, and then he received a response from the monastery. A young Taoist boy of 6 or 7 ran out from the monastery of Eternal Spring, gasping for breath as he said, "The old ancestor has said that he will not see any guest today." Qin Changsheng pinched the young Taoist boy's flushed cheeks and said with a smile, "Tell the old ancestor that this is a matter of White Emperor City." No one tried to stop him. It seemed like these words truly had great meaning to Shang Xingzhou. The monastery of Eternal Spring was filled with fields. The fields were not planted with rice. The pine trees on the ridges were very beautiful, but this did not mean that the fields were beautiful. A faint qi enveloped the fields of early spring. The several dozen temples of the Taoist monastery had originally been planted with medicinal herbs. Under the guidance of the young Taoist boy, Qin Changsheng walked to this medicinal field, picked up the hoe by the ridge, and began to remove the weeds and leaves. There was no update tomorrow. Chapter 93. The fine rain sprinkled down like mist, gradually drenching his face and collar. The weeds and old leaves that had been tossed to the edge of the ridge were stained with dew and looked very beautiful. As the light gradually shifted, he finished his work in the medicine field. The young Taoist boy appeared again and indicated that he should follow him. At the end of the endless medicine field were several verdant hills. As one followed the mountain path, a hot mist pervaded the air. Surprisingly, there were several hot springs between the pines and cypresses. Qin Changsheng was rather looking forward to soaking in the hot springs. Just when he was about to take off his outer robe, he saw that figure in the mist. In the hot and humid mist, the pines and cypresses still maintained their vigor, but the ones with the most vigor were the strange moss growing in the rocks around the hot springs. This moss was somewhat yellow, or more accurately, golden. It was the extremely rare gold coin hide recorded in the pharmacopoeia. The figure in the mist was currently collecting the gold coin hide, extremely cautious and focused. A gust of wind blew some of the mist away from the pines and cypresses, revealing the scene on the cliff. This person was bent over, still giving off the impression of being tall and straight. His hair was already white, but it was still combed neatly, just like it had been in the past. Chen Changsheng bowed and then stood to the side. As time passed, the light gradually brightened, the mist dispersed, and the gold coin hide began to retract, becoming no different from ordinary moss. Shang Xingzhou gave a medicine bag to the accompanying Taoist, took a cup of water from the young Taoist boy, and took a sip. He walked along the mountain path to the pavilion and sat down. Chen Changsheng walked out of the pavilion. Shang Xingzhou did not even glance at him, nor did he have him sit down. He straightforwardly asked, "What does Bai Xingyan want to do?" 10 years ago, in the Battle of White Emperor City, this master and disciple had worked together for the first time. Chen Changsheng had not known that Su Yorong had played the role of bridge, but the final result was extremely good. The master and disciple, one inside and one outside, one visible and one hidden, had forced a supreme expert like the White Emperor into a dead end. In the end, they had acted according to their plan, working together to kill the two angels of sacred light and destroy Madame Mu. As for whether the White Emperor had shed a tear in the sea of clouds, no one knew. It seemed that Qin Changsheng was right. Since Shang Xingzhou cared the most about the northern expedition, then he must be very concerned about the alliance between the human race and the Yao race. Chen Changsheng said, "The White Emperor still doesn't want to put in too much effort, or perhaps he doesn't have any sincerity in cooperating with us. I'm more worried about what will happen in the future." The negotiations and specific matters between the two sides were handled by the officials of the imperial court and the bishop of the Li Palace. But from certain details, it could be seen that the White Emperor truly did not have much interest in this war, or perhaps it could be described as disdainful. With his connection to Luo Luo, he had a better grasp of the situation. The current demon race was a little weak. If Emperor Bai had not taken advantage of the situation to exterminate the elephant race, things might have been better. The experts of the senior generation of the demi-human race, including Xiaoda, had yet to see any signs of breaking through. Compared to the human race, they were far too lacking. For at least 3 years, the demon clan would only have one sanctuary expert, Emperor Bai. His safety was far too important to the demi-human race, so he would never leave White Emperor City, would never stray far from the protection of the Red River Array. Moreover, if the demon race helped the human race defeat the devil race, what benefits would it bring to them? The problem was that the human race was so powerful that the demi-human race could not refuse the Alliance's request to send troops. If Chen Changsheng were the White Emperor, he would not know how to deal with the current situation. In truth, there had always been an extremely simple solution to this problem. In the last 10 years, this idea had spread more and more, gaining the support of more and more people. The 800 li of the Red River, the 30,000 li of mountains and rivers, the demi-human people are all waiting for you to marry their princess, and the entire court supports you. Just what are you hesitating for? Shang Xingzhou asked. Chen Changsheng wanted to say something, but hesitated. Shang Xingzhou said, "It's not like there's no precedent for a secondary wife." Chen Changsheng shook his head. Shang Xingzhou was not surprised by his answer or the speed with which it was given. "Correct, there's no need to do this, and besides, this matter is not as important as people think." Chen Changsheng was rather confused at these words, thinking, isn't the alliance with the demi-human race the most important thing? In the past, Taizong fought the strong as the weak, so he needed to unite all the strength that could be united, but there's no need now. The confluence of the North and South is something that must be done because we are fellow citizens. And whether the demi-human race is willing to serve us or not, it's just a side issue. In the end, we still have to rely on ourselves to do things. We are strong enough, so why should we care about other things? Shang Xingzhou's words were for Chen Changsheng, as well as for all the people of the Great Zhou dynasty. The Monastery of Eternal Spring had always maintained contact with the imperial palace, and His Majesty would often come to Luoyang to celebrate the new year, but it was said that Shang Xingzhou had never once said a word or two about the affairs of the court. To put another way, this was the first time in 10 years that Shang Xingzhou had spoken on worldly matters. His meaning was crystal clear. He had to take a tough stance against the demi-human race. Even if White Emperor City was unwilling to send troops, this war could not possibly stop. Qin Changsheng raised the most important question. Why did Sir write a letter to Wang Pu and have him receive us? How did Sir know that this was a scheme laid down by Black Robe and the 8 great mountain men? Shang Xingzhou replied, Black Robe deliberately let me know. Qin Changsheng was so shocked that he couldn't speak. Just what is going on here? Is this another internal conflict among the demons? Black Robe and the demon commander want to use the hands of human experts to completely erase all traces of the Grand Scholar's lineage. But when he thought about it, the demons were already in such a perilous moment. So how could Black Robe be so unwise? Not even Shang Xingzhou could be sure of the true answer. Was it because she was still a human? Or had Wang Jitze gone to Shualao City? Qin Changsheng awoke from his shock and asked, just who is Black Robe? In the end, Shang Xingzhou did not answer this question. Qin Changsheng was taken away by the young Taoist boy and taken up residence in a small courtyard on the side. After eating a simple meal, he received a box. This is what the ancestor wanted you to give me, he asked the young Taoist boy in shock. The young Taoist boy forcefully nodded and then ran out of the courtyard, his little arms swinging, looking extremely cute. Qin Changsheng was truly flabbergasted. In his memory, he had never received anything from his master. Those 2 rare items would, many years later, prove to be nothing more than sad foreshadowing. He nervously opened the box and realized that there were 2 very exquisite magical artifacts inside. Based on the material, they seemed to be primarily bronze. After studying them for some time, he finally understood that these were 2 communication magical artifacts made from the shards of the clear sky mirror. Using the innate divine abilities of the clear sky mirror, one could communicate with each other in real time over long distances. This was truly an extraordinary item, completely worthy of being placed on the new tier of legendary weapons. Shang Xingzhou had probably personally forged them, and he had spent a great deal of effort on them. Such precious magical artifacts should be used on the battlefield. Why did his master give them to him? His spiritual sense fell on the stone pearl on his wrist, causing one of the gray pearls to light up. Su Yurong's voice suddenly came from the stone pearl. Speak, I'm busy. Qin Changsheng recounted what had happened. Su Yurong's voice vanished for a while, then came back. Perhaps this is for us. Chapter 94. Qin Changsheng thought of a possibility. Just now, when his master mentioned being a co-wife, he rejected it. So these 2 tools made from the fragments of the Hao Tianjing were complements? Yes, his master had always seemed to admire Yurong. 10 years ago, he seemed to have expressed it in White Emperor City. According to Yuren, Shang Xingzhou rarely mentioned Qin Changsheng during the New Year, but he did mention Mount Li a few times. After all, it was another sect, so, as the holy maiden, Su Yurong should not always go and disturb them. If he shouldn't go to Mount Li, then where should he go? The Li Palace or Luoyang? Thinking about how Su Yurong could easily gain the favor of the elders, Qin Changsheng couldn't help but feel a little envious. Shang Xingzhou thought that it was inconvenient for them to live in 2 different places, so he made such a small thing. However, he did not know that they had already solved this problem. He and Su Yurong had a special method to keep in touch, so when the White Crane arrived at White Emperor City, he was able to immediately inform her the news on Holy Maiden Peak. The glowing stone pearl on his wrist was a heavenly tome monolith. The heavenly tome monoliths had always been a kind of spatial passage. Whether it was the laws of the mausoleum of books or the method of entering and exiting the Garden of Zhou, they all proved this point. In these 10 years, he and Su Yurong had constantly comprehended and researched the heavenly tome monoliths, finally grasping a portion of their mysteries. Their voices could pass through the heavenly tome monoliths to reach the other side, but slightly condensed spiritual sense and real objects were still unable to do this. At this moment, the other gray stone pearl on Qin Changsheng's wrist lit up. Luo greets, sir. A crisp sound rang out from the stone bead. Yes, she also had a heavenly tone monolith, and she had also learned how to communicate with Chun Changsheng. With a light pop, the stone bead that was communicating with Su Yu Rong went out just like that. Chun Changsheng opened his mouth, not knowing what to say. When Luo Luo saw that he didn't reply, she couldn't help but worry. She shouted, "Mister! Sir! Are you all right, sir?" Chun Changsheng said, "I'm fine, I was just a bit distracted." "That's great." Even though they were separated by 100,000 miles, Chun Changsheng felt as if he could see Luo Luo's adorable appearance, as if she was relieved of a heavy burden, and her little hands kept patting her chest. Suddenly, he finally understood why Su Yurong had been so unhappy in the past few days, whether it was in the plains of the Elf Race or in Xuanyang City. So it was because of what happened that day. That day was really similar to today. The White Crane had come from the Mount Song Army headquarters. When he had contacted Su Yurong, he had been rafting on the Red River. At that time, Jingyu was singing in the water, and Luo Luo was beside him, using her small hands to feed him fruits. Luo Luo didn't know that Su Yurong could hear her. He had not thought of this at the time. What did Princess Luo Luo say at that time? Curiosity was written all over Tang 36's face. Even though his beard was being blown around by the wind, it couldn't hide his curiosity. Chun Changsheng used his peripheral vision to confirm that no one was looking at him and no one was listening to Tang 36. He lowered his voice and she said, "Mister, be good and open your mouth." Tang 36 was stunned. He wanted to laugh, but he didn't dare to. His face turned red. The people on the city wall finally noticed the commotion. The Prince of Zhongshan slightly raised his brows, somewhat displeased. The Prime Minister chuckled and comforted him a few times. Linghai Zhuang and Daoist Siyuan glanced at each other and pretended not to see. Archbishop Lin, who had just returned from the Bear Tribe, smiled wryly and did not say anything. This was Xuanyang City. All the important figures were on the city wall. As spring deepened in the central plains, the vegetation grew thicker and the snowy plains of the north grew warmer. That momentous event had finally occurred. After several hundred years, the human race once more embarked on a northern expedition. The emperor personally offered a libation and escorted them from the imperial palace to the capital. Pope Chun Changsheng even escorted them all the way to Xuanyang City. The plains outside Xuanyang City were packed with people, a dense mass like a tide. These people were all going to meet their deaths, so this tide was the world's most powerful and frenzied wave. Hundreds of thousands of powerful divine senses and killing intents merged together. Even the fiercest west wind in the world could not rival it. Even if the golden giant dragon were to return to the Middle-earth continent and look at this soaring, killing intent from 1,000 miles away, it would be frightened away, not daring to approach it at all. More than 10,000 orthodoxy cavalry, 60,000 black armor cavalry, and an even greater number of ordinary soldiers. 6 prefects of the Li Palace, 23 divine generals of the Great Zhou, 3,000 priests, all the elites of South Stream Temple, the disciples of Mount Li Sword Hall, and the experts of the various sects and sects, the guardians and experts of the various great clans. And there was also Wang Pe, Xiao Zhang, Huai Run, the Mount Li sect master, Mao Qiuyu, and the Prince of Xiang. All these experts of the divine domain were ready to act at any time. In terms of momentum, this was no less than the Northern Expedition. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers set off one after another, setting off on their journey. The wilderness outside the city gradually quieted down, and the atmosphere became more and more somber. No one laughed anymore, and no one paid attention to what had happened earlier. Tang 36 turned to the mountains to the west and frowned. "I didn't expect the Prince of Xiang to be willing to follow the left army." Xuanyang City was the place where 10,000 arrows were fired. It was very important and required an expert of the divine domain to hold down the fort. Chao Yunping had a good relationship with everyone, and his personality was straightforward and amiable. He was deeply trusted by everyone, so, in the end, he was chosen. In the last few years, the Prince of Xiang had spent the vast majority of his time in Blue Pass, keeping an extremely low profile. This was naturally not because of his son, Prince Chun Lu, who had been left behind in the capital as a hostage. But because of the current situation, everyone had believed that he would assuredly jump out and fight for this position. But to their surprise, he remained silent. If it were the Prince of Zhongshan, it would have been very easy to understand. This violent prince, for the sake of the pride of the Chan imperial clan, would assuredly lead his army to charge at the very front. There are still many unexpected things. For instance, you actually grew a beard. Chen Changxing looked at Tang 36's face and shook his head. He still felt very unused to it. Tang 36 said, "My elegance is even greater than it was in the past, so I grew a beard to conceal it. I also wanted to reduce the number of romantic deaths." In the last few years, his personality had truly become much more composed, and he rarely cursed in front of others, but he was still as narcissistic as before. It could not be said that he was completely narcissistic. His words were still somewhat true and somewhat helpless. The old lady of the Mutuo clan had fallen seriously ill last year. After she recovered, she had seen through the affairs of the world, but she was still worried about her most beloved granddaughter. So she personally went to Wenshui and lived in the Tang clan's old estate. After shamelessly pestering for 3 months, she wanted to marry into the Tang clan, forcing Tang 36 to not dare return home or stay in the Orthodox Academy. In the end, he and Su Moyu returned to Shiling's 10,000 Years Pavilion to celebrate the new year. Chen Changsheng asked, "I hear that the young lady is extremely beautiful." Tang 36 replied, "The Mutuo clan has always had many beauties, but am I one of those shallow people who only look at appearances?" Chen Changsheng said, "Yurong knows that young lady and says that she has an extremely good personality and is a straightforward person. You should at least meet her." Tang 36 sneered. "I dare to bet that these weren't her exact words." Chen Changsheng froze, then said, "Her exact words were that you weren't worthy of that young lady." Tang 36 was furious and left with a flick of his sleeve. He descended from the wall, took the reins, mounted his horse, and rode north. In this entire process, he did not even glance at Chen Changsheng. "Come back alive!" Chen Changsheng yelled. Countless gazes fell on him, but he seemed to be completely unaware. Tang 36 waved his hand, but did not turn around. Chapter 95. Tang 36 came online. Of course, he wasn't going to be the vanguard because he didn't have the ability and no one would agree. In this battle, his role was to be the commander of the army provisions. More accurately, he was Jin Yulu's assistant. Although Chen Changsheng's trip to White Emperor City didn't achieve what the humans wanted, it at least freed Jin Yulu from his vegetable garden. This legendary demon general would continue to play the important role he once played hundreds of years ago. All of the supply wagons, provisions, and armaments sent by the court to the front lines, the support from the provinces and commanderies, and the donations from the noble clans and merchants were all under his control. His deputy's position was also extremely important. Logically speaking, Tang 36 qualifications were not enough. At least, it would be hard for him to convince the public, but no one dared to oppose this appointment. It wasn't because of Tang 36's background, nor was it because he was willing to give up the honor of being a young master of a noble family to go to the front line. It was because the Tang family donated a sum of money. Liang Wang's son donated half of his family's property to the army, and the Wenshui Tangs also donated half of their family's property. It was the same half of the Tang family's assets, but only when they saw it with their own eyes did they understand how terrifying the Tang family was. Half of the Tang family's assets was a terrifying number. The experienced and knowledgeable officials of the Ministry of Revenue were shocked speechless when they saw the accounts brought in by a dozen carriages. The entire continent knew that the Tang family was the wealthiest family in the world. They had deep foundations and accumulated wealth. But this time, the world knew that the Tang family was actually this rich. The saying that one's wealth could rival a country was indeed true. The Tang Old Master was truly an extraordinary person. If one's wealth could rival a country, he would often become the enemy of the entire country. This was a law that was difficult to escape, and it was the source of many tragedies. After the details of this matter were spread, Many people wondered if the Tang family didn't want to offend the imperial court, so they used this method to reduce the court's hostility. Half of the Tang family's assets were indeed a lot. It was as painful as losing an arm, but as long as the Tang family could survive, it was worth it. This deduction seemed reasonable, but Chen Chongqing knew it wasn't the truth. Breaking into Xiulao City and subduing the demons was the Tang Old Master's lifelong wish, the only thing he had wanted to do in the last several centuries. In this regard, he and Shang Xingzhou were natural allies, the firmest comrades in arms. Nothing could change his mind. It could even be said that he lived to see this day. As long as the human race could completely defeat the devil race, why would he care about wealth? If not for his descendants and the continuation of the clan, he would have even thrown the entire Wanshui Tangs into this war. What would it feel like to be the grandson of such an old man? Chen Chongsheng looked at the dust in the field outside the city. His lips curled up, and he smiled. Tang 36 was riding a white horse. He was dressed in white and had the Wanshui sword tied to his waist. He looked very elegant. He didn't say anything to Chen Chongsheng, nor did he tell him to take care, because this battle was certain to be won. Just as Mountain Man Yinji had said, the general trend had been formed. The demon race was doomed. Just as the Tang Old Master and Liang Wangsun had done, the humans were willing to pay any price to cast aside their hatred, all for the sake of victory in this war. The human world had been waiting for this day. For this war, the human race had prepared for a long time. In terms of resources and manpower, it had already been 10 years. In terms of strategic planning, it had been going on for several hundred years. In terms of spiritual will, it had been thousands of years. Countless sages, countless martyrs, regardless of which emperor or which pope, everything they had done had been for the sake of this day. The undercurrent had been surging for countless days, and, as the situation changed, it had finally become a spring tide. The demons had once been the hegemons of the continent, struggling at death's door in the north, muddling through, so they simply did not realize this point. Even if some clear-headed and cool-headed personages had realized this point, like the young demon lord or mountain man Yinji, they had been given too little time, and the demons were too chaotic internally. Every time he thought of the demon's current situation, Chen Chongsheng would rejoice, but he would also be somewhat confused, and then he thought of Shang Xingzhou's words in Luoyang. Perhaps that person had still realized that he was still human. As he gazed at the dragons of dust in the plains and sensed the extremely minute vibrations, Chen Chongsheng could no longer be bothered to think about that question. Were those vibrations the hooves of horses galloping away, or was it his own heartbeat? He felt like his heartbeat had sped up for no reason. Was it because the curtain was about to be lifted on this magnificent war? The demons were certain to lose, and the humans were certain to win. The general trend was already set. But we still had to work hard, truly work hard. Only then can we truly win. He thought about how, in the years to come, how much hot blood would be shed by those young men and women leaving Xuanyang City, how many sacrifices would be made. Even someone as calm as him couldn't help but feel his cheeks heat up. He thought of the heaven sword and dragon saber. The valley in the late spring was covered in blood. The low-level demon soldiers became even uglier after death, the corpses in the grass exuding a foul stench. The plains were not too hot, but if they were left for too long, they would inevitably rot. At the very beginning, the human armies would use array masters to clean up the battlefield. After every battle, the clear light of arrays and the flames that followed could be seen all over the plains. Later on, more and more demon soldiers died, and the battle grew more and more tense. In order to conserve the magic power of array masters, there was no longer such a requirement. The temporary tents were set up on high ground, but this so-called valley was actually a continuous stretch of grassland. It could not be said to be easy to defend or difficult to attack. Twilight dyed the distant plains and the nearby carriages. The smoke from the chimneys had already dissipated, and the bonfires were gradually brightening. A sorrowful song could be faintly heard, but it drew even more curses. Liang Hongzhuang leaned against the wheel of a carriage, narrowing his eyes as he gazed at the setting sun, the grass in his mouth trembling. Of course, he was not wearing that red dancing dress, nor was he wearing heavy makeup. It was just that he was naturally beautiful, especially with that pair of eyebrows that were as dark as ink and slender as hooks. Amidst his charm was a heroic spirit, a natural romantic. When he first entered the battlefield, he had attracted countless gazes, but now no one dared to discuss him. In the army, he had the highest cultivation, killed the most demon soldiers, and also suffered the most injuries. There was a very deep wound under his ribs. Through the gaps in the bandages, one could see the white bone and smell the stench of decay. A person squeezed in next to him and sat down. As he gazed at the corpses of the low-level demons on the meadow, a mocking expression appeared on his face. It's been so many days, but we haven't seen a single high-level demon. Could they have all been killed off by the old demon lord? The speaker was Feng Guijun. Not too long ago, he had been the governor of Xuanyang City for several decades, but now he was a general on the front lines. When he heard Liang Hongzhuang say those words to the Pope below the stage, he had vaguely guessed at his end. But he had not expected that he would be together with Liang Hongzhuang on the front lines. He didn't know if this was the Pope's will or the Holy Maiden's arrangement. Liang Hongzhuang ignored him. Feng Guijun sneered. The imperial court want me to send myself to my death as repayment for half the property of your Liang household. But what about you? Why didn't your elder brother come, but instead sent you to your death? Yes, coming to the plains was, from a certain perspective, sending yourself to your death. Although the humans currently held the absolute advantage, and in so many battles, the number of demon soldiers dying was twice that of the human soldiers, people would still die in the end, especially now that many people had noticed that the situation was rather strange. Feng Guijun's ridicule stemmed more from his unease. Upon entering the plains, the human armies had already encountered many demon armies and engaged in many fierce battles. They quickly realized a very strange phenomenon. Other than an extremely small number of officers, there was no sign of any high-level demons in these battles. Even the strongest of the demons, the wolf cavalry, were nowhere to be seen, as if they had vanished. The ones rushing towards the human army like a tide were the lowest rank of the devil army. These low-level demon soldiers were slow to develop their intelligence and could even be described as stupid. Even if they possessed immense strength that surpassed ordinary humans, in front of the crossbows and array masters of the human armies, they could only be slaughtered. Logically speaking, they should not have been too difficult to deal with. The problem was that the low-level demon soldiers the human armies encountered were different from the ones they had encountered in the past. The low-level demon soldiers had become even braver, their temperaments more violent, their methods more cruel, and they even seemed to have no fear of death. If these low-level demon soldiers of the past were only of low intelligence, they now seemed to have lost their minds and become purely tools of slaughter. Countless low-level demon soldiers, fearless of death, would pour in wave after wave, bringing great pressure to the human army, whether it was in terms of battle or spirit. The army led by Feng Guijun had suffered severe casualties, and it was hard to say how much longer they could last. A similar situation was probably taking place in the various areas of the grassland. Liang Hongzhuang said, "It should be some sort of medicine that has made these ugly fellows lose their minds and only know how to send themselves to death." This was the conjecture of many people, but they did not understand why the demons were responding to the situation so extreme when the war had just begun. It had to be known that this medicine had assuredly had extremely powerful side effects. From the moment these low-level demon soldiers took the medicine, they were practically dead. Feng Guijun gazed at the darkening dusk, the worry in his eyes deepening. He muttered, "Just what does the demon race want to do?" From a certain perspective, he truly had been sent by the imperial court to send himself to death to appease the old grudges of the Liang household. But he had still been the governor of Xuanyang City for several decades and was now a general on the front lines. Liang Hongzhuang said, "The demons want to scare us away." Feng Guijun froze, then understood what he meant, and a bitter smile appeared on his face. They were the vanguard at the very front. If the demon strategy really was this, they would have to endure an endless stream of attacks until the Central Army tent gave the order to retreat or one side was completely wiped out. You said that we were all sent to die. So what's there to be afraid of? Liang Hongzhuang added, and even if we die now, we've still profited. From the start of the battle until now, he had already killed 30-some demon soldiers, while Feng Guijun and the soldiers he led had already killed 3 times their number. They truly had profited. Feng Guijun said nothing more. Liang Hongzhuang spat out the grass in his mouth and began to sing a sorrowful song. Curses once more rose up from the surroundings, but this time he did not stop. Liang Hongzhuang's singing was rather strange. It was deep and distant, like a river slowly flowing over the plains. After listening to your opera for so many years in Xuanyang City, I've always felt that your singing style was rather strange, but I've never asked you. Feng Guijun asked, just what sort of school of inheritance is this? The Jin clan of Luling or the Orange Water Zhang? Liang Hongzhuang replied, it's said to be the opera singing style of Xuelao City. Feng Guijun was very shocked. He pointed at the corpses of the demon soldiers in the grass and said, can you understand these things? Liang Hongzhuang shook his head. I don't know. The Red Falcons suddenly issued a warning and an urgent military order from the night sky. The nearest human armies had been attacked by the enemy, and the main target of the enemy's attack was this meadow. The grass trembled. The twilight deepened, transforming into the darkness of night. In the darkness, countless demon soldiers were surging over. Feng Guijun knew that this battle would definitely last the entire night. His face couldn't help but pale. Will we still be able to see tomorrow's morning light? Liang Hongzhuang stood up and glanced at the night sky. The stars today are very beautiful. Chapter 96. The night sky was cut into a small piece of black cloth by the eaves that were very close to each other. The stars were really bright today. It was as if a weaver had used gold thread to sew many small flowers onto a black cloth. It was very beautiful. This was the deepest side hall of the Li Palace, and also the place where Chun Changsheng resided. At this time, he was eating with Go Hanshi accompanying him. Qiu Shanjun was left to guard Mount Li, and Qi Jian was not permitted to follow Zhishu north. Guan Fei Bai, Liang Banhu, and Bai Kai went to the front lines. Go Hanshi was left behind by him. After a very simple meal was over, and Hua and the priests placed the files that had just been delivered on the table in front of Chun Changsheng and Go Hanshi. There was no sound in the side hall, only the sound of flowing water. It was unknown where the green leaf had gone. After an unknown amount of time, Go Hanshi raised his head and rubbed his tired face. And Hua, who was standing at the side, offered him a scalding towel that she had prepared. Go Hanshi was slightly startled. After thanking him softly, he took the towel and wiped his face. Qin Changsheng also finished marking his papers, and Hua hurriedly walked over. After a while, he and Go Hanshi began to converse softly, exchanging their opinions and analyzing these scrolls. Their opinions would be sent to the imperial palace in the shortest time possible for His Majesty to consider. At the same time, Startaker Academy would also provide an opinion. His Majesty would discuss with the Prime Minister and the various ministers to come to a final conclusion. Everything in the Great Zhou dynasty revolved around this war. As for the ordinary affairs of the court and the people's livelihood, they were handed over to MOU. It had to be said that the emperor trusted MOU very much. And from the reactions of the imperial court in the last few days, she had not let down this trust in the Tianhai divine empress's teachings. This kind of life had been going on for a few days, but Go Hanshi still couldn't get used to it. For instance, why was the towel Hua handed him so hot? Was her hand not afraid of blisters? He was a very meticulous person and had long ago noticed that Hua's hand was truly uninjured. And why did the Li Palace receive reports from the front lines even faster than the army? The Li Palace would often learn of some important news the moment it happened on the front lines. Go Hanshi could not understand this. In comparison, the means of the devil race did not surprise him too much. The 7th report from the 13 divisions of Radiant Green has been sent back. It is confirmed that the hearts of the demon soldiers are swollen and congested and are 1.5 times larger than normal. He said to Chun Changsheng, Our calculations were correct. They used drugs to stimulate their power, but at the same time, they destroyed their rationality. They no longer had the instinct to fear death. Chun Changsheng said, "Is there an antidote?" As soon as the words left his mouth, he shook his head, knowing that he had asked a very stupid question. Even if the antidote could be found, there was no way to make the hundreds of thousands of low-level demon soldiers willingly eat it. If his and Go Hanshi's deductions were correct, the medicine used by the demons actually came from the human race. 10,000 years ago, the longevity sect had once used many Yao servants. It was said that there were some eccentric and extremely talented elders who liked to use these Yao servants to research the berserk transformation of the Yao race. It was unknown whether or not they managed to discover anything in the end, but they did create a medicine that could stimulate the potential of a living being and forcibly turn them berserk. The effects of this medicine were extremely fierce. Once used, the heart would explode and the user would die. There were no exceptions, so the longevity sect had very quickly sealed it into a forbidden area. The medicine used by the demons was very similar to the medicine of the longevity sect recorded in the Taoist canon. When they associated it with the fact that the longevity sect was secretly colluding with the demons, the truth was right before their eyes. Fortunately, the longevity sect had declined, and 20 years ago, they had been massacred by Suli. The demons were never as numerous as us. Now, 2 or 3 demon soldiers are enough to exchange for one of us. Chun Changsheng said, "This sort of method feels too crazy and unreasonable." Go Hanshi replied, "Whether it's reasonable or not depends on the specific situation. Although the low-level demons are very important to the reproduction of the demon race, if too many of them die now, it will affect the future of the demon race in the long run. But right now, their first consideration is to survive. If they can scare us away, even if 4/5 of the low-level demons die, they might still be willing to accept it." Chun Changsheng fell silent. The situation described in the reports from the front lines truly was rather thorny. The war had just begun, but the demon race had already adopted the stance of a decisive battle. Although there were no experts dispatched, anyone would feel a little frightened at the thought of hundreds of thousands of demon race soldiers pouncing on their positions without any regard for their lives. Before the crazed and suicidal attacks of the demon soldiers, many human soldiers truly had crumbled. On some of the battlefields where the pressure was the greatest, there were even cases of soldiers fleeing in disorder. If Linghai Zhuang and the Orthodoxy cavalry had not just happened to pass by and killed more than 100 people, they might not have been able to suppress the demons. If the demons wanted to use this sort of method to scare the human army away, or at least dampen their morale, then they had to admit that they had succeeded. Liang Hongzhuang held this view, and so did Go Hanshi, though he thought a little further than Liang Hongzhuang. I don't know if this is the Demon Lord's plan or Black Robes, but it's obvious that the other side's more important goal is to wear us down. Go Hanshi stood up and said, "He wants to wear down our courage, energy, and most importantly, time." A map condensed from clear light hung in the air. He used his finger to draw 3 lines on the map and said, "From the focus of the other side's attacks and the time it takes for them to shift, their goal is very clear. They want to use these 3 waves of attacks, to use these 30,000 some li of grassland and lives to buy enough time." The human army was already 17 days behind the original plan. If they continued to slow down like this, even if the human army could break through the demon defenses and reach Shualao City, it would probably be late winter. That would be an unimaginably perilous situation. "What should we do?" Chun Changsheng asked. Go Hanshi thought for a while, then said, "Just follow the original plan." Confused, Chun Changsheng asked, "Just act as if nothing happened?" In reality, nothing really happened. We all know that the demons will resist at all costs. Go Hanshi continued. On the contrary, in my view, whether this is the Demon Lord's or Black Robe's plan, they both made a grave mistake. There's been no war for many years, and at least half of our armies on the front lines have never stepped onto the battlefield. This time, the demon offensive is very urgent, so it can be used as a test, a tempering, to turn them into true veterans. Chun Changsheng said, "This sort of test and tempering is very difficult." Go Hanshi said, "If we can't even get through this barrier, how can we talk about attacking Xiulao City?" Chun Changsheng said, "Even if we can get through this barrier, there will be many unexpected losses. Yes, many people will die this time. It might be people we know, people we don't think should die so early." Go Hanshi looked at him and said, "But everyone will die. We will also go there, and we will also die. So please be calm." Chun Changsheng walked to the edge of the pool and gazed at the slowly spinning wooden ladle in the water. He thought of that pot of green leaf, thought of his martial uncle the Pope holding the green leaf and fighting a bitter battle with the divine Empress Tinsum years ago in the ruined southern city. He sternly said, "I don't want to stay in the capital." "No." Go Hanshi did not hesitate. Chun Changsheng asked, "Since we will go sooner or later, why not go earlier?" Go Hanshi replied, "You are the Pope, so you must stay in the capital and calm the people. Only when we can see Xiulao City can you leave." The moment they could see Xiulao City would be the moment of the final battle. If Chun Changsheng left the capital at that time, his believers and people would not be worried about the state of the battle. Instead, they would be even more confident in their victory. This was an arrangement that had already been decided upon, or perhaps it could be said that this was something that had already been discussed before the battle. When a human army attacked Xiulao City, Chun Changsheng would be present, not the emperor. The scrolls were carried away by the priests, and the opinions and plans were sent out of the Li Palace as quickly as possible to the imperial palace. Go Hanshi took the hot towel and Hua handed him, expressed his thanks, and then covered his face with it to slightly relieve his fatigue. When he opened his eyes, he realized that Chun Changsheng was no longer there. He suddenly heard the clatter of a sword. Go Hanshi went out of the stone room. Chun Changsheng quietly stood inside. There was no sword in the stone room. It was impossible to tell what he was thinking. Go Hanshi sensed the strangeness in his mood and asked, "What happened?" Chun Changsheng replied, "Liang Hongzhuang is dead." Go Hanshi's expression flickered. "Liang Hongzhuang?" Chun Changsheng replied, "Yes, someone I know." Chapter 97. Go Hanshi was quiet for a while, then said, "I know who he is." Liang Hongzhuang was Liang Wangsuan's younger brother, and he had another secret relationship with the Mount Li Sword sect. He was a clansman of Liang Banhu and Liang Xiaoxiao. The two were silent. The stone room was very quiet. Just as they had discussed earlier, there might be unexpected losses this time. Some people who should not have died so early in their eyes had died. Liang Hongzhuang was this sort of person. He was an important member of the Liang household and also a star condensation expert. The war had not even begun many days ago, and based on past events, it was far from reaching the most bitter stage, yet he had died. Chun Changsheng and Liang Hongzhuang had met 3 times and exchanged several dozen words. They could not be considered familiar, but they were still people he knew. He also knew many people on the battlefield. Tang 36, Linghai Zhuang, the teachers and students of the Orthodox Academy, like Chu Wenbin and her. But Go Hanshi also knew many people: Guan Feibai, Liang Banhu, Bai Kai, his martial uncles from the Sword Hall, his fellow Taoists from the south. "My apologies, you shouldn't be the one advising me," Chun Changsheng said to Go Hanshi. Go Hanshi replied, "You should have guessed that Yurong wanted me to say these words to you." Chun Changsheng gazed at the string of stone pearls on his wrist and said, "She could have said these words to me herself." The former governor of Xuanyang City, Feng Gejun, had once worried about whether they could endure a night of continuous demon attacks, whether they could see the morning light of the next day. As it turned out, his worries were unnecessary. His army had not been able to endure the first wave of attacks. Just as night fell, those crazed demon soldiers broke through their defenses. The number of devil soldiers was just too great. When they saw the black tide on the plains under the starlight, he and all the other human soldiers inwardly groaned. Liang Hongzhuang did not groan, no fear on his face. He did not howl, nor did he sing a heroic song. He simply charged at the black tide. Reality also proved that brave people would always be rewarded with good fortune.
Divine General Peng Shihai personally led the cavalry to successfully change the course of the battle, saving these soldiers who had bitterly held out for 2 days and 2 nights. Fierce battles were happening everywhere on the grassland. Most of the time, people were fighting for themselves. The fact that this place could be rescued naturally meant that there was an important person here. Although the imperial court had sent him to his death, the imperial court was not willing to see the governor of Xianyang City die so early, let alone Liang Hongzhuang. The bonfire was lit again, illuminating the meadow. The demon soldiers had already lost their minds, so there was no need to worry about being ambushed. The surviving soldiers gathered around the bonfire, their faces covered in blood and water without any expression. More than a dozen white, ceremonial robes fluttered on the meadow. They looked like beautiful white flowers and attracted many gazes. The teachers and students of the 13 divisions of Radiant Green searched everywhere for the survivors, using medicine to provide timely treatment. Occasionally, they could even see the clear light of the sacred light technique. Unfortunately, in such a fierce war, it was hard to find too many wounded people. Dead bodies of human soldiers were everywhere on the meadow. In the end, no one found Liang Hongzhuang. When the former governor of Xianyang City, Feng Guijun, was found, his body covered in blood and his expression particularly perplexed. In a daze, he was constantly muttering to himself, there was no need, no one understood what he was trying to say, nor did anyone know why he had become like this. Feng Guijun clearly remembered what had happened just now. Liang Hongzhuang raised his spear and charged at the black tide of demon soldiers, but was quickly drowned out. He, who had lived like a prince for so many years, truly was very afraid. He wanted nothing more than to turn and run, but his experience over the last few days told him that the demon soldiers had already become true beasts. There was no longer any reason to speak of. If he did not kill them all, they would continue to chase him. And he was still the governor of Xianyang City. He had once been the governor of Xianyang City. Now he was a general. With a roar, he led the surrounding soldiers and charged at the demon soldiers. He had basically forgotten what happened next. He only remembered that he was constantly swinging his blade, constantly falling, and then crawling back up. At the beginning, he could still feel the pain from his body, but later on, he couldn't even feel the pain anymore. He only felt that the blade in his hand was getting heavier and his breathing was getting heavier and heavier. Just when he was exhausted and wanted nothing more than to put aside everything and just fall asleep, he suddenly heard a distant voice in the darkness. Reinforcements had arrived. His mind roused. He used the last of his strength to charge towards the perimeter, but he sank into despair behind the meadow. Several dozen demon soldiers had just charged out of the darkness, their mouths dripping with stinking saliva and their eyes blood red. Just when he believed that he and his bodyguards were doomed, he suddenly saw a person amongst the demon soldiers. Liang Hongzhuang stood up, leaning on his spear on the verge of collapse. Feng Guijun wanted to tell Liang Hongzhuang to run, but he could not make a sound. Liang Hongzhuang did not run. He had chosen to self-detonate. The true essence in his ethereal palace and the 108 chi openings simultaneously erupted. A silver firework illuminated the meadow. The blazing and divine star radiance instantly tore apart the bodies of those demon soldiers. For cultivators, this was the most tragic way to die, the most painful farewell. There's no need, isn't it just death? It's not like I said I wasn't willing to die, so why make yourself feel so much pain? Feng Guijun absent-mindedly sat on the grass. General Feng? A woman dressed in white ceremonial robes walked up to him. The curtain hat covered her face, making her voice somewhat indiscernible. Feng Guijun ignored her. There was a flash of black light. Feng Guijun's palm was pierced by a small hairpin, leaving behind a delicate bloody hole. The perfect amount of pain finally brought him back to his senses, but it was not enough to make him scream. Still using the starlight, he did not see the tide of demon soldiers, but an incomparably beautiful face that also left him stunned. "Is it, milady?" Feng Guijun asked in a trembling voice, and then began to cry.
Milady should have come to save him. The woman ignored him, indifferently saying, "Congratulations, you now have two choices. You have already been proven to be courageous in battle, and the crimes you once committed have already been redeemed. You can return to Xuanyang City. Of course, you can no longer serve as the city guard, but you can continue living as an ordinary citizen." Slightly perplexed, Feng Guijun asked, "The second is?" The woman replied, "You can stay. Once you recover from your wounds, you can follow the army north." Feng Guijun did not speak for a very long time. Anyone else would have known which of these two choices to choose. If it was an hour ago, he would have made a decision very easily. Now, he found it extremely difficult. He knew that she would not deceive him, because that was something that she disdained to do. "I choose the second choice." His voice trembled, clearly still fearful and uneasy. The woman was somewhat surprised. "Why?" Feng Guijun raised his head and earnestly asked, "I hear that there's an opera in Xuelao City." The woman nodded. Feng Guijun said, "I want to go there and hear just how different it is from the singing of the Jin clan of Luling and the Orangewater Zhang." Feng Guichuan and the heavily wounded that had already been discovered were sent to the southern camp to be treated. After recovering, they could choose to return to the army or go home. The teachers and students of the 13 divisions of Radiant Green remained on the battlefield, continuing to search for the wounded and treat the soldiers. At certain times, the faint fragrance of herbs even masked the stench of blood and decay. But the most serene and peaceful was still the sacred light. The work of treating the wounded continued into the day. No matter how serious their wounds were, as long as they could find them, they could all be treated. Sometimes, it was almost a miracle. The battle came to a pause. All the demon soldiers in a 100-li radius had been cleanly killed. The vanguard reorganized itself, but strangely, besides the red falcons heading to the main camp, many red geese had also landed in the meadow, and in the afternoon, many fast horses were arriving. A piece of news gradually began to spread among the tens of thousands of soldiers. The Holy Maiden was on that meadow. Su Yurong walked toward the front of the meadow. Wherever she passed, the golden flames would burn the rotting corpses of the demon soldiers into smoke. Now that her identity had been exposed, there was naturally no need to conceal it. A gentle breeze blew away the smoke, restoring the meadow to its former brightness. Tinsome cavalry were waiting in front of her. The two sides of the meadow were covered in kneeling soldiers. The wounded were also struggling to kneel, their faces brimming with piety and fortune. To be personally treated by the Holy Maiden, how many lifetimes was this fortune that could be cultivated? The cavalry that had come from all over represented the will of many divine generals, as well as some important personages of the capital. They were all emissaries that wanted to persuade Su Yurong to hurry back to the capital. The most important reason was naturally safety. Everyone knew that the Holy Maiden had the bloodline of the Heavenly Phoenix and was a true cultivation genius. Although young, she was already half a step from the divine. But this was a battlefield brimming with death and slaughter. Without the Pope at her side, one could not help but feel somewhat uneasy. Another important reason was that the South Stream Temple Sword Array was also not at her side. The disciples of South Stream Temple were also not in the southern camp, but in the even more distant and even more important Central Army tent, responsible for protecting the commander-in-chief of the northern expedition. The cavalry began to kneel, begging the Holy Maiden to return to the capital as soon as possible. Su Yurong did not even glance at them. She took a letter from the hands of a South Stream Temple disciple. This disciple had traveled day and night and was extremely exhausted. She sat down on the ground and began to meditate. From this, one could easily imagine the importance of this letter. This letter came from the Central Army tent, but it did not come from the commander-in-chief, nor did it have anything to do with the capital. It had been written by Yi Xiaolian. The South Stream Temple Sword Array that guarded the Central Army tent was currently under her command. For this reason, she knew many secrets. Of course, one could not rule out the possibility that some important personage wanted to use her to accurately deliver information to Su Yurong. Many important personages, including the divine generals, had always known that the Holy Maiden was on the battlefield. In the bitter battles of the last few days, she had led the teachers and students of the 13 divisions of Radiant Green to various battlefields, saving the lives of countless soldiers. Why was it that these important personages had not pointed it out in the past few days, but now stood up and used the name of safety to implore her to return to the capital? The explanation Yi Xiaoyan gave in the letter was that Su Yurong had saved too many wounded people on the meadow today. To save so many heavily injured people on the verge of death, one could not rely solely on the sacred light technique. The Holy Maiden had assuredly used that medicine. In the last few days, she had probably also used that medicine, but she had not used too much so everyone could still endure it. Today, she had used too much medicine, so everyone was truly unable to endure it, so they wanted to ask her to leave. In truth, everyone believed that the authority to distribute this medicine should not have been in her hands. The Holy Maiden was benevolent and loved the people of the world, willing to pay any price to save anyone who was injured. But if that medicine was used up on ordinary soldiers, what would happen if a divine general was injured in the future? What would happen if a prince died? This sounded very callous, but this was a battlefield, a war. The distribution of any resource had to have rules. Life and death were fated, but there was definitely a weight to it. There had been no war in the last few years, so the Li Palace had removed the monthly distribution of cinnabar pills. One only needed to make a simple calculation to know how many cinnabar pills they had accumulated. The authority to distribute the cinnabar pills was in the hands of the Li Palace, but when it came to the specifics, they still had to consult the generals on the front lines. In times of peace, the combined will of the powerful personages represented by these cavalry would not have been able to shake her in the slightest. But this was a time of war, and the status of the army was rising. Moreover, the intentions of the generals were reasonable from a certain point of view, and they had given her sufficient respect. So what sort of answer would she give? Su Yurong slowly took off her veil hat, revealing her perfect face. The surrounding plains grew even quieter. Only the nearby disciples of South Stream Temple could see the exhaustion on her face. She turned to those cavalry. A cool breeze rustled the long grass of the plains, creating a sound like waves. Chapter 98. In the very beginning, Liang Hongzhuang was killed by the 9th Demon General. Later on, when I wrote it, I realized that I liked him and respected him, including when he was pursuing Su Li. Thus, I wanted him to leave more cleanly, so I changed it to this style of dying for the country. I will make some changes to the previous sentence. It truly was wrong. I apologize. Su Yurong silently gazed at the small bottle in her hand. She still had some of these bottles, not in her sleeve, but in the tong bao. Countless gazes fell on her hand, some fanatical, some nervous, and some uneasy. Everyone had guessed. This small bottle contained the legendary cinnabar pill. It was also the most important reason why all the generals had bitterly begged Su Yurong to return to the capital. These pills are Chun Chongqing's, so what's his is mine. Su Yurong turned to the kneeling cavalry and said, I know that many of you are unconvinced, but do not let me know, because it will make me unhappy. The bodies of the cavalry stiffened, as they understood the meaning in her calm tone. Unspoken words were important messages that did not need to be spoken to be heard. She was replying to the entire world. If she was unhappy, perhaps the world would no longer have any cinnabar pills. The cavalrymen bowed in the most respectful manner and left as quickly as they could, spreading her orders throughout the grassland. The South Stream Temple girl looked at her, hesitating to speak. Was it better to return? Su Yurong's body and mind were both very powerful, but she was still rather tired. But she would not leave. Only here could she see the immediate changes on the battlefield, the truest situation. At the same time, the people of the capital could see the truest situation. The current situation was very complicated, and this could be seen from the selection of the commander-in-chief. Su Shiji, who had been recommended by many, upon receiving her letter, had shut himself in his estate, feigning illness and refusing. Peng Shihai and the other divine generals of Chun Guansong's faction currently occupied half of the Great Zhou army. But if one wanted to choose a commander-in-chief from among them, one would inevitably encounter the fierce opposition of the Western army system, represented by Shui He. Moreover, it would be very difficult to obtain the approval of the Li Palace. A candidate close to the orthodoxy would also find it impossible to obtain the support of the ministers of the court and the princes of the Qin clan. Everyone thought about it, and finally cast their sights on a place that had been forgotten by many for a long time, the divine general of the East estate. Right now, Su Shiji seemed to be the most acceptable candidate for the various forces. However, very quickly, the Su estate received a letter from the Holy Maiden Peak. From then on, the gates of the Su estate were tightly shut. Su Shiji, on the other hand, insisted on refusing due to illness. People understood that this was the Holy Maiden's intention, so they naturally did not force her. The final selection of the commander-in-chief was very unexpected. When the imperial edict was passed down to all the counties, many people had not even heard of that name. Divine General He Ming was once the commander of the Black Armored Cavalry. He was very low-key and could even be said to be a nobody. But he had sufficient seniority and was Chun Guansong's junior brother. Yet he did not have a close relationship with Peng Shihai and the other officers of the Star Caesar Academy. Moreover, in the Battle of the Orthodox Academy 10 years ago, he had led the Black Armored Heavy Cavalry to a halt outside the collapsed Mount Mo. His performance had been extremely mature and steady, simultaneously winning the admiration of the Emperor and the Pope. In other words, the most important reason why he could be the commander-in-chief was that all parties could accept him, and he didn't belong to any party. The problem was that this also meant that he wasn't Chun Chongqing's man, nor was he the Emperor's man. No matter how mature and steady a person was, when they held great authority, they could still have other thoughts. On the bitter battlefield, when one's blood was stimulated, one's ambition would often grow with it. Thus, Su Yurong would not leave this place. The shadow of death finally left the plains. Perhaps it was because that drug that stimulated one's potential and erased reason was gone, or perhaps it was because the large number of low-level demons had died that even Shualao City found it somewhat unbearable. In short, on a certain day in the early summer, the human armies no longer saw those blood-eyed, beast-like demon soldiers charging. As the demon armies retreated, they would occasionally see some sporadic battles. It was clear that these demon soldiers had not taken that drug. Although they were still rather stupid, they were no longer as daring as they had been a few days ago to charge into the ballistae, much less fearless of death. The plains were covered in blood of different colors. When this blood dried, it would turn into large patches of color. From a distance, it looked like a painting. He Ming gazed at the painting on the plains and recalled the words of the bishop he had invited from the Li Palace when he and Chun Guansong were studying the history of demon culture at Star Caesar Academy. The demons are just this sort of strange species. The low-class demons are no different from beasts, but the high-class demons possess an unimaginable sense of beauty. Moreover, the two classes are not completely isolated from each other. There is a close relationship between them, and they influence each other. Thus, in the paintings of Shualao City, there are often large and crude blocks of color. If the nobles of Shualao City really could order around the low-level demons like monsters, this war would become even crueler. If the demi-humans were still the slaves of the demons, there would be no chance of victory in this war. This was all thanks to Emperor Taizong's wise decision. As he looked in the direction of the capital, Divine General He Ming felt a similar emotion for the Pope. The initial stages of this war had been exceptionally bitter, far surpassing the calculations made before the war had begun. From a certain perspective, this was a clash of resources, resolve, and wills built up over 1,000 years between the human and demon races. This clash ultimately rested on two kinds of medicine. The demons had used the poison developed by the longevity sect. Based on the quantity, Shualao City had actually been preparing for this war for many years. On the human side, the cinnabar pills that Pope Chun Chongsheng had accumulated for 10 years had basically all been used up. At this point, the war had reached its second phase. The human armies continued to advance north, following the direction in which the demon armies had been routed. They broke through two defense lines and allowed the plains to be completely in the hands of the humans. The temperature gradually rose as the summer approached. It really was the height of summer, But the plains were wide, and the mountain range that stretched for several thousand li had many openings. Wind blew through them, but the army did not find the heat unbearable. In the early morning, they could even feel a little chilly. One morning, a rapidly moving red suddenly appeared in the gloomy sky, dragging a red line behind it. It was probably a red eagle. The moment the red eagle flew over the peak of the mountain, two vigilant sentries noticed it and blew a warning horn. A group of cavalry galloped out of the camp, perhaps to ensure the safety of the intelligence report or to receive someone. That red eagle had probably discovered the enemy on the other side of the mountain. Logically speaking, the majestic mountains several dozen li away had already been searched many times and should not have any ambushes. But this was still the territory of the demons. Who knew what strange tricks they had up their sleeves? The red eagle was still extremely fast and did not seem tired. Not long after flying over the precipitous cliff, it suddenly dropped to the ground. Just what was in that cliff? A figure suddenly appeared from a pile of rubble, rushing like a bolt of lightning into the plains and toward the human camp. This was a disciple of the 10,000 Years Pavilion, famed for his swift movement techniques. He was assigned the most dangerous position at the front. When the 10,000 Years Pavilion disciple was still several li from the camp, he suddenly grunted and crashed to the ground. Crossbow bolts. A furious and shrill yell rose from the camp, followed by the twang of bowstrings. Several hundred crossbow bolts, imbued with a divine radiance, tore through the gloomy morning light and landed behind the 10,000 Years Pavilion disciple. They covered an area of several dozen zhang in radius, leaving behind densely packed holes in the ground through which smoke rose. The human army was already very experienced. Those demon soldiers skilled in pursuit would often emerge from the ground. Soon, the cavalry arrived in front of the 10,000 Years Pavilion disciple. The 10,000 Years Pavilion disciple's leg was covered in blood, clearly broken. But he did not care, only yelling. There are demons in the mountain. I can't determine which tribe they belong to, but there are many of them. The cavalry grabbed him onto their horses and returned to the camp. No one noticed that 3 cavalrymen continued to gallop towards the mountain in the distance. No one knew what they were going to do. The morning had not yet awoken, and the cliffs facing the human army were very gloomy. The voices of demon soldiers suddenly came from the cliffs, but it was impossible to see where they were coming from. They had clearly searched the area many times, so why had they failed to find any traces of these demons? Several dozen small caves were located in the middle of the cliff. Let alone the demon soldiers. Not even the thin human soldiers would be able to squeeze in. When they had first searched the area, they had believed these caves to be bird caves, so they had not paid them much attention. No one had expected that the enemy was hiding in these bird caves, because the enemy was either demon soldiers or birds. They were a kind of black-gray vulture. Several thousand vultures surged out of these small caves and then flapped their wings into the sky. It was clear that these vultures had been trained, perhaps even directly controlled. They appeared to be extremely orderly. Even when they flew into the sky, they did not disperse. The 3 cavalrymen were still some distance from the mountain. Seeing the activity in the sky, they were rather confused. Even if these vultures had been trained to attack targets on the ground, it was still too much of a fantasy to think that they could rely on their sharp vulture claws to cause damage to the human camp. At this moment, the first ray of morning light pierced through a crack in the mountain and shone on the grassland. The sudden light caused a vulture to panic and loosen its claws. A black object dropped down. With a boom, the grassland in front of the cliff burst into flames. The 3 cavalrymen glanced at each other, seeing the shock in each other's eyes. But they did not slow down, speeding up toward the mountain. Chapter 99. The fiery light in front of the mountain had similarly raised the alarm of the camp. The soldiers awoke from their sleep, took up their weapons, and began to run to their positions. The array masters completed the preparations to activate the array as quickly as possible, and the 800 crossbowmen formed a crossbow array at the very front of the camp. This was the North 3rd Camp, under the command of Divine General Peng Shihai. He gazed at the several thousand vultures that covered the sky his expression still indifferent, his voice not trembling in the slightest as he methodically issued 10-some military orders. Only the personal guards standing at his side noticed that their commander's fists were tightly clenched, his knuckles rather white. It was not fear, but anger and anxiety. If every vulture was carrying a weapon similar to gunpowder, what sort of trial would the North Third Camp face today? The array set up by the array masters could cover half the camp, but it would not be able to hold out for too long before such a fire. As for the crossbow array, it should be able to shoot down a group of vultures, but based on the altitude at which the vultures were currently flying, by the time the crossbow bolts could reach them, they would already be flying over the camp. Thus, what difference did it make whether they threw down the gunpowder or were shot down? If only Master was here. A cavalryman who was climbing up the cliff shouted. Another cavalryman shook his head and said, even if Master was here, he might not be able to kill all these birds. The third cavalryman said nothing, his body exuding a cold chi and his soaring, killing intent. In his view, the North Third Camp would assuredly become a sea of fire. Even if the array could resist for a few moments, it would still suffer grievous losses, and the fastest wolf cavalry of the demon race might be waiting in the north to attack. In other words, there was no way to reverse this defeat. Thus, he had to at least kill the commanders of those vultures and prevent such defeats from occurring in the future. To be able to climb such a steep cliff and think like this, he and the other two cavalrymen were naturally no ordinary soldiers. But even though they were powerful cultivators, there were still many things on the battlefield that could not be changed. Suddenly, a shrill cry resounded through the sky. The three cavalrymen subconsciously stopped and turned to look in the direction of the human camp, where they saw a completely unexpected sight. Rays of green light spread out from the grassland that was illuminated by the morning sun, eventually forming a formation that enveloped the first half of the military camp. Even at such a distance, he could still see the flickering light of the sacred light crossbows. The human army was ready for battle. However, those vultures did not even reach the top of the camp before they all fell to the ground. There seemed to be an invisible and mysterious power in the world, appearing in front of the vultures, causing them to panic and feel powerless to flap their wings. Thousands of vultures fell to the ground like raindrops, turning into flames that soared into the sky as they landed on the grassland. The scene was incomparably spectacular. "What's going on?" one of the cavalrymen shouted in pleasant surprise. The cavalryman with a cold aura shouted, "Speed up!" Seeing that the camp was safe and sound, the three cavalrymen's spirits were lifted. They rushed towards the caves in the middle of the cliff, their speed as fast as flying swans. When they arrived in front of the caves, the three sensed the cold chi seeping out from within and knew that the demon freak was still inside. Without any delay, their swords whistled out of their sheaths, shooting into the caves like cold rays of light, moving with unimaginable speed. At first, there was no sound from the cliff, but then there was a muffled thud, followed by the incessant sounds of cutting, mixed with cries of pain and curses in the language of the demons. Eventually, the demon freak began to repeat a certain phrase, seeming particularly panicked and terrified. After an unknown amount of time, the sound in the cliff finally disappeared. Three cold swords flew out of the caves and returned to their sheaths. The morning sun was higher than before, its light shining on the mountain to the side and then reflecting off the cliff, illuminating the faces of the three cavalrymen. One face was calm and serene, one face was firm and cold, and one face was youthful and lively. They were Liang Banhu, Guan Feibai, and Bai Kai. Bai Kai curiously asked, "What was that demon freak shouting before he died?" Liang Banhu and Guan Feibai glanced at each other and laughed. Guan Feibai's smile faded as he sternly said, "Eldest brother told you to learn the language of the demons, so why didn't you listen?" Bai Kai aggrievedly said, "There are more than 100 kinds of demon languages, so how could I learn them all?" Cries of alarm could be heard all over the plains, because the same thing was happening in all the camps. The demons had not mobilized a large number of soldiers to counterattack, but had launched countless sneak attacks at the same time. This sort of sneak attack was more accurate to describe it as a surprise attack. The demons had used all sorts of strange techniques and had dispatched many experts. This was the first time since the start of the war that the demons had sent experts into battle. But just like in the first phase of the campaign, once they moved, they attacked with all their strength, leaving no room for retreat. The demons had more than 3,000 tribes, of which no less than 100 possessed powerful fighting strength. Today, the leaders of these tribes and their strongest warriors were either bursting out of the ground or flying down from the cliffs, their faces savage. A beast tamer from a remote lake commanded a monster to launch a suicidal attack. A wandering warrior from the slums of Shiwalao City who had failed in his ambitions threw off the hide covering his body, took up his heavy demon axe, and leapt out of the monster horde. The targets of these experts were extremely clear, and they had been specifically targeted: the provisions, array masters, and commanders of the human army. Several hundred small-scale battles began simultaneously on the plains. Although they did not have much effect on the overall situation of the battle, they succeeded in creating a massive chaos. Behind the chaos was often a clear and callous intention. As the sun rose over the horizon, its light refracted by the mountains and plains, making the world even darker. The demon's true intentions seemed to have finally become clear. Several hundred demon experts exuding a somber chi, concealed by an array intent that could disrupt the workings of the heavens, arrived less than 20 li from the human army's tent. The battle intent that could disrupt the workings of the heavens caused the clouds in the sky to gather once more. Drops of rain began to fall, falling on the faces and lips of the soldiers, making them feel rather light and empty. This was the power of a law. Had an expert of the divine domain arrived? The commander-in-chief, Divine General Himing, was a low-key and composed man, but in certain aspects, he was extremely adventurous, even radical. The Central Army tent had been pushed to the very front, only 100-some li from that mountain called Mount Noralang. At this crucial moment, there was no need to hold anything back. The human experts had finally moved. The pure white and blazing holy light illuminated the dark and gloomy world. It tore apart those cotton-like flowing clouds and revealed a corner of the blue sky. Mao Qiuyu and Huai Run walked out of the Central Army tent. With a wave of their sleeves, they killed 10-some demon experts. No one was surprised by this. Even those demon experts who had come to their deaths had long ago predicted their fate. How could the most important Central Army tent not have an expert of the divine domain standing guard? Since the demons had long ago predicted this, they had naturally made corresponding preparations. The sky suddenly dimmed. The deep blue had disappeared, and a black, broken chessboard was faintly discernible in the faint fog. At the base of Mount Noralang, a pitch-black path had suddenly appeared in the empty grassland. The edge of this path was not even like a piece of paper that had been casually torn apart. This description was actually very appropriate, because it was originally a passage torn out of space by the demon race's terrifying grand array. Several demon generals, leading several thousand wolf cavalry, surged out of the valley from several hundred li away and galloped toward the Central Army tent. The clouds gradually thickened, obscuring the sun. The darkness seemed to come early, and several particularly tall figures appeared in the darkness. They were probably members of the Council of Elders or some of the nobles of Shiwalao City. Mao Qiuyu and Huai Ren's expressions did not change, remaining very calm. Since the demons had predicted that they would be here, they could naturally guess that the demons had made corresponding arrangements. Late last night, they had already seen the possibility of that path appearing on their fated star plate. Up until now, nothing new or unexpected had occurred. Suddenly, Huai Ren's eyes turned solemn. Mao Qiuyu's sleeves began to move. An extremely large black silhouette suddenly appeared on the summit of Mount Noralang. Unlike the demon generals and the wolf cavalry, this black silhouette had not appeared through the path in the valley, but on the summit. The sky was growing gloomy, but the wind had dispersed much of the fog in front of the mountain, revealing the true appearance of this massive black silhouette. This was an extremely rare, mountain-toppling fiend from ancient times. It had a long snout and coiled horns, and was extremely vicious. It was 40-some zhang tall. On the coiled horns of the mountain-toppling fiend sat a very thin and small demon, not even the size of a human child. It wore a suit of armor, and the armor was covered in complex designs woven from golden threads. Many dark green objects were embedded in the armor, some of which were emeralds, others copper that had been corroded by time. An unimaginably terrifying chi seeped out from the chink in the armor, but it was far less cruel and evil than this demon's gaze. When this demon appeared on the summit, the world for several hundred li around, it seemed to fall silent for a moment, because it was the demon commander. After an extremely short period of silence, howls and shouts of killing could be heard. The several thousand wolf cavalry madly charged at the central army tent. Because the demon commander had arrived, it was obvious that if they wanted to defend the central army tent today, they had to defeat, or at least block, the demon commander. When the old demon lord was still alive, he had been the undisputed second-ranked expert of the snowy plains of the land of demons. Now that the old demon lord was dead, could it be said that he was the strongest expert of the demon race? No one knew the answer to this question, because Mountain Man Yinji had secluded himself from the world, and because Black Robe had still not used his full strength. But there was at least one fact that could be confirmed. The demon commander was no ordinary expert of the divine domain. If Chun Chongsheng were here, he might have recalled that Su Li had used the word abnormal when he mentioned the demon commander by the hot spring. If even Su Li found it abnormal, one could imagine just how cruel and powerful the demon commander was. Mao Qiuyu was well aware that he was no match for the demon commander, and Huairun had only been a divine domain expert for an even shorter time. So who could stop him? A sword glow came from the south. That sword light was clear and serene, just like real water. This sword glow washed away the haze in the sky and drowned out the howls of the grassland. It seemed leisurely, but it was actually murderous as it slashed at the summit. A plume of black smoke suddenly rose from the charging wolf cavalry. The 8th demon general flew through the air, treasure in hand, as he attacked the sword glow. The sword glow seemed like a reflection on the water in the corridor. With a slight tremble, it circled around the 8th demon general. With a light swish, a clear sword slash appeared on the 8th demon general's armor, lines of fire flowing through it like lava. The unbearable pain caused this demon general, famed for his perseverance, to let out a furious roar. With this furious roar, a plume of black smoke rose from the wolf cavalry, but its momentum was far greater than before. Demon Chi soared into the sky, forcefully stopping the sword glow. The sword glow would occasionally flash, illuminating the black smoke, and the occasional sound of metal breaking could be heard. The 3rd demon general finally managed to block this sword glow. His helmet was covered in slashes, and a small part of his demon horn had been broken off, demon blood gushing out. It was just a single sword glow, but it had required 2 high-ranking demon generals to act one after the other block it, and they had been in such a sorry state, even injured. It was different from Su Li's sharpness and freedom, and also different from Chun Chongsheng's directness and unswerving determination. This sword was even more serene, even gentler, yet it did not lose its sharpness. It was completely traceless, impossible to grasp, and extremely profound. On the side of the camp was a tent used to store miscellaneous items. An old Taoist walked out from within. He held a sword in his right hand and a sheath in his left. Whether it was the way he walked or the way he held the sword, there was nothing beautiful about it, and it had nothing to do with the word otherworldly. But anyone with a discerning eye could see that this sword was no ordinary object. It was like the autumn water that had been washed for 3,000 years, so bright that it was impossible to look at it directly. It seemed as if it wanted to obscure the world before everyone's eyes, including the heavens and earth. Could this be the legendary heaven-shrouding sword? Could this ordinary old Taoist be the sectmaster of the Mountly sword sect? The officers and soldiers in the camp were shocked speechless, and one by one, they opened a path. Mao Qiuyu and Huai Ren slightly bowed. Chapter 100. The two demon generals on the plains, the demon elder of even higher cultivation, and the Duke of Shuilao City all had abnormally grave expressions. The remnants of the sword intent drifted to the summit of Mount Noorlang. The demon commander grabbed at the air and brought it to her nose to sniff, feeling a little wary. The Mountly sect master had broken through 10 some years ago, but he had not received much attention. In the view of many people, this old Taoist, who had never left the sect, had only relied on the supreme techniques of the Mountly sword sect and several hundred years of bitter cultivation to barely break into the divine domain. He truly didn't count for much. Who could have imagined that his cultivation in the path of the sword was so astonishing that he had already walked on the second threshold? Mao Qiu looked at the Mountly sect master and said, "I will have to trouble sir today." The Mountly sect master glanced at Mount Noorlang and waved his hand. "I can't beat this villain." Without waiting for Mao Qiu to speak, he pointed at the two demon generals on the plains and said, "These two can't beat me, so let me." Mao Qiuyu and Huairan were taken aback, thinking, how magnanimous are these words, and also thinking, who will deal with the demon commander? There was no time to think. The fog in the dark path was getting thicker and thicker, and those tall figures were getting clearer and clearer. The demon elders and the Duke of Shuilao City had already descended onto the battlefield. If they were not stopped, the Central Army tent would suffer a direct attack. In the breeze, Huai went to meet the Duke in his fluttering robe. Mao Qiuyu, on the other hand, waved his sleeves and went to block the member of the Council of Elders. The Mountly sect master held his sword in his right hand and the sheath in his left. Stepping on a rainbow light, he charged at the two demon generals. The experts of the divine domain appeared one after another, their powerful chis clashing against each other, stirring up gales and dust. A sword glow tore apart everything in the world, followed by a ray of heavenly light that illuminated the plains. Demon chi as thick as the darkness gushed out of the valley, devouring the sword glow like a true dragon from the abyss. The heavens turned upside down and the earth went dark. Countless unimaginable miraculous scenes played out in the sky and on the earth. Some of the mountain peaks near Noorlang were completely flattened, golden blood dripping down from the sky, igniting in the wind and emitting boundless heat and holy light. Meanwhile, the blood of the demon experts was like ink, painting the sky even darker. In that short period of time, it felt like countless days and nights had passed. The human army on the plains relied on the barrier of the array to barely hold on against the shock waves produced by the collisions of the divine domain experts. Occasionally, the experts of the army and their crossbows would try to help the human divine domain experts, but they were unable to break free from the harassment of the wolf cavalry. The demon commander remained on the sidelines, her cold and cruel gaze piercing through her helmet towards a certain place in the south, waiting for someone. About 100 miles to the west was the most dangerous right camp of the Western Army. No one had expected that the most important personage of the Western Army, the Prince of Xiang, would not remain in the rear, nor would he pay any attention to the people of the Tsong Province Army headquarters. The streams of light in front of Mount Noorlang could be seen clearly in the sky. Even though they were more than 100 li away, they seemed to be right in front of their eyes. The Prince of Xiang's hands rested on the fat dripping down from his belt as he squinted at the sword glows and demon chi, his thoughts inscrutable. If he had set off at the start of the battle, he should have been able to participate in this rare chaotic battle between the sanctuary powerhouses. But he did not do this. He believed that it was still far from the most crucial moment. The most crucial thing was that not everyone had arrived. Yes, just like the demon commander, he was also waiting for a person to arrive. "He's here! He's here!" Cries of joy rose from the rear of the Central Army tent. These cries were like sparks thrown in a boiling oil, quickly spreading throughout the entire camp and the entire battlefield. Whether it was the human soldiers or the wolf cavalry on the perimeter, they all heard this distant voice. He had arrived. That person had finally arrived. The winds howled. The gravel slapped against the blades of grass, making a pitter-patter sound. A person appeared before everyone, dressed in a cloth gown that had been washed so many times that it had turned white. His face was unpresentable, and he looked like an accountant who owed a great deal of money. Wampa had arrived. No one knew where he had been a moment ago. No one knew where he had come from. This was not the Central Army tent. He was not in the habit of standing at the Commander-in-Chief's side. This was not the storeroom. He had no interest in playing games. He walked over from the south. To the south was the world of the human race. His shoulders were drooping as usual, making it easy for him to grasp the hilt of his saber. The grassland was in chaos, desperate battles of life and death taking place everywhere. Shouts and cries of pain rose and fell, and the winds and sand obscured the eyes of many people. In such a vast and complicated scene, Wampa was just a very inconspicuous star. No one should have noticed him, but when he walked over from the south, everyone, including the soldiers and experts of the devil race, saw him. No matter how wretched his clothes were, how ordinary his demeanor, how dazzling the world he resided in, he still possessed the strongest sense of existence. The demon commander, however, closed her eyes. The temperature on the summit suddenly plummeted, and the black rocks were covered in a thin layer of white frost. Against an opponent like Wampa, even she had to be cautious and use all her strength. Wampa did not seem to move very quickly, as if he were walking in normal pace, but he very quickly passed through the human camp and arrived on the battlefield. The situation on the battlefield was abnormally complex. Unexpected situations could occur at any time, bringing many variables and dangers. But Wampa did not quicken his pace, nor did he change his direction. He continued to calmly walk. The demon commander closed her eyes to gather energy, to prepare for their encounter later on. That was assuredly a heaven-shaking, thunderous strike. Wampa was no stranger to this. Back in Tanja Temple on the outskirts of the capital, he had sat under that ginkgo tree for 10-some days and nights, his blade never unsheathed. He was comprehending the path of the blade, and he was also gathering energy. It was only because of this that he had been able to kill Tai Shu with a single strike of his blade on the banks of the Luo River. At this moment, he was walking towards the mountain peak. This process was also accumulating power. The ranking of demon generals was similar to that of the divine generals of the Great Zhou. Seniority and reputation were taken into consideration, but the most important factor was absolute strength. Syndicate was currently the third-ranked demon general of the demon race, possessing an extremely powerful cultivation. None of the divine generals of the Great Zhou were a match for him, and coupled with the fact that he was deeply trusted by the young demon lord and had been granted a few powerful demon artifacts, he could be considered a true expert of the divine domain in terms of fighting strength. Just now, that sword glow had shaved off a small portion of his demon horn and caused him to bleed and be in such a sorry state. Besides, the profound nature of the Mount Li sect master's attack was also because he had somewhat underestimated his foe. Moreover, he had not expected the sword in this old Taoist hand to be so terrifyingly sharp. This injury had made him much more clear-headed and cautious. Together with the 8th Demon General and a few other experts of the military, he fought with the Mount Li sect master, appearing very composed. He saw Wampa walking across the battlefield, but he found it impossible to escape the envelopment of the Mount Li sect master's sword intent. With a fierce howl, he ordered the wolf cavalry to attack Wampa. At the same time, he indicated with his eyes that the 8th Demon General should work with him, bringing the entire force to the center of the battlefield. No matter how frightening those wolf cavalry were, they could not injure Wampa. The 3rd Demon General understood this point. He only hoped that he could interrupt Wampa's gathering energy. In a battle between Wampa and the Demon Commander, even the tiniest influence could directly alter the course of the battle. The Mount Li sect master guessed at this demon general's intentions. His long brows fluttered as he lightly flicked his finger. The heaven-shrouding sword had just shattered the 3rd demon artifact, leaving the 8th demon general covered in blood. Suddenly, it encountered that gust of wind and gave off a crisp hum. The sword hum was extremely clear and cold, spreading over the entire plain. Several seemingly ordinary soldiers walked out from the chaotic battlefield and came to Wang Po's side. The wolf cavalry began to charge. The bloodthirsty wolves' eyes were filled with madness, while the demon cavalry let out unpleasant howls. Several awe-inspiring sword intents soared into the sky and slashed at them. Those ordinary soldiers were actually elders of Mount Li's sword hall. Cold swords flashed as the wolf cavalry dropped to the ground, blood splashing everywhere. Several sword hall elders walked at Wang Po's side like bodyguards. No matter which side the wolf cavalry charged from, they would cut them down. They wanted to ensure that Wang Po would not be disturbed in any way, even if this would affect their swords, even if it would injure them. Before the battle with the demon commander began, Wang Po should have done nothing. In the view of many people, this was the only way to look at the overall situation. But Wang Po had never been a person who could calmly accept the good intentions of others. If he did that, how could his blade be as powerful as it was today? On the western side of the plain, Huai was currently battling with that member of the Demon Council of Elders. The elegant and austere finger energy pierced through the air like an arrow, shattering dozens of Yuan-Chi locks and leaving deep bloody holes on the demon race Grand Elder's body. The World Stream Divine Finger truly was no small matter, especially when used by a divine domain expert. The demon elder gave a harsh howl as he snatched the scepters of the two tribal leaders and sucked in the souls attached to them, instantly healing his injuries. Not only that, his demon body began to visibly grow larger. He was now 10 samjang tall and cloaked in the darkness. He seemed like a demon god. At this moment, a clear metallic cry came from the distance. It was the sound of metal scraping against each other. The blade was about to be unsheathed. The demon elder's expression suddenly changed, confirming that he had no time to dodge. He let out a strange cry of despair and fell like a mountain toward Huai. The blade intent that seemed to come from beyond the heavens cut a hole in the darkness. With several crisp sounds, several wounds appeared on the demon elder's shoulder. The light from the heavens shone on the horsetail whisk, white as silk, and gathered into a cloud that bombarded the demon elder's chest. The demon race's grand elder suddenly shattered, turning into black powder that filled the sky. The wild grass within a radius of several li withered upon touching it. Huai face was pale and blood trickled down from the corner of her lips. She turned to the center of the battlefield. Wang Po was walking toward the mountain as if he had done nothing at all. Many gazes fell on his body. His hand was already gripping the sheath. His thumb was pressed against the lower edge of the hilt. A section of the metal blade was exposed. Chapter 101. Noralang Peak. The demon commander sat on the mountain-toppling fiend's coiled horn, her eyes closed as if she had fallen asleep. In addition to the green patina in the cracks of the armor, there was also a lot of frost. His aura had been raised to its peak state, and even the mountain was expressing its submission. Of course, he was not asleep. He was listening to the movements in the grassland. He heard the swords of Mount Li, heard the sleeves of the Li Palace, heard the slender fingers of South Stream Temple, but he remained unmoved. Then he heard the sound of an iron saber being unsheathed, and he suddenly opened his eyes. He's actually so confident. Many years ago, not far from Shualao City, Black Robe had organized an assassination plot against Su Li. At the most crucial moment, Chun Changsheng emerged from the Garden of Zhou and delivered the yellow paper umbrella into Su Li's hands. Su Li gripped the hilt of his sword, and the demon generals several dozen li away were heavily injured. Su Li pulled out half of his sword, and Black Robe retreated in defeat. Today, Wang Po already had some of Su Li's elegance, even though he did not directly attack. However, just as the demon commander was puzzled, the one who had died was a divine domain expert, so Wang Po should have expended a lot of energy. Was he not afraid that it would affect the upcoming battle? There was a tear in the front of Xiao Chen's robe. When the wind blew, it made it difficult for him to walk. The moment the saber intent appeared, the tear was cut off, and he flew far away like a kite with its string cut. Wang Po thought of Xiao Zhang and thought to himself, I wonder where that bad-tempered fellow is right now. I can only hope that he won't go to Shualao City alone. He looked at the other side of the grassland. That was another battlefield. The Mountly sect master waved his sleeve. I don't need it here. Separated by 10-some li, his voice clearly resounded in front of Wang Pa. Wang Pa nodded in acknowledgement and continued walking forward. The 3rd and 8th demon generals suddenly put away their weapons and retreated a distance. 3 pitch-black magic artifacts exuding a gloomy and cold aura fluttered in the sky above them, monitoring the surroundings. The Mountly sect master was slightly taken aback. His white eyebrows rose as he also retreated some distance. At the same time, the human cavalry and wolf cavalry retreated to the sides. There were 2 bloodthirsty wolves that were too stimulated by the smell of blood and refused to obey the order to leave. As a result, they were beheaded by the demon cavalry without hesitation. A path appeared in the middle of the grassland that was several miles wide. From the grassland to the peak of Noralang, the passageway was empty. There was nothing in it. It was extremely quiet. Elsewhere, the battle was still raging. The silence here was especially strange. The demon commander opened his eyes, indicating that he was ready. Wang Po's blade was also ready to be unsheathed. At this point in time, the battle could no longer be interrupted, nor could it be disturbed. The demon commander was the strongest of the demon race. This was already a publicly acknowledged fact in the snowy plains of the demon region. Wang Po's seniority couldn't compare to that of other divine domain experts, but he was indisputably the commanding general of the human race. In a sense, the battle between them represented the war between humans and demons. Such a battle should be respected. This also meant that no one could lose. Wang Pa gazed at the mountain several dozen li away. Mount Noralang was black in color, but now its head was white. In a short period of time, a thick layer of snow had accumulated on the peak. This was the manifestation of the demon commander's fighting spirit, cold and insufferably arrogant. There was a trail of footprints on the grassland behind Wang Pa. That was his path. Just like his saber Dao, it was extremely straight. Wang Pa vanished. When he reappeared, he was 10-some li away in the sky. The demon commander was not waiting for him on the peak. The mountain-toppling fiend gave a pain howl. Its nostrils spewed out a hot mist while its descending feet left 10-some spiderweb cracks in the rock of the mountain. The snow madly danced. The demon marshal jumped into the sky, and with a flip of her hands, a saber appeared in her hands. It was a massive scimitar. The blade was bright, but its edge was black, condensed from the darkness of the night. No one could have expected that the true weapon of such a short creature was this scimitar. It was more than 3 times its height. The demon commander descended from the sky, both hands gripping the scimitar as it slashed at Wang Pa. Wang Pa pulled out the scimitar, straightened it with his forearm, and slashed at it just as he had slashed at the Luo River. Boom! There was a massive explosion. The darkness spreading out of the valley suddenly began to sway like a tangible black cloth, like an inky ocean. Thousands of plumes of dust rose from the cliffs and plains. Within a radius of several hundred kilometers, both human and demon soldiers covered their ears with their hands, their faces contorted in pain. Even though their eyes were red with killing intent, they were forced to temporarily halt their attacks. The 200-some wolf cavalry closest to it were directly jolted to death, not even having the time to scream. The demon commander was jolted back to the summit of Mount Noralang, accurately sitting on the horn of the mountain-toppling fiend. After rolling 700-some times in the sky, its face was rather pale, but it was somewhat obscured by the helmet and the complicated patterns of its jewels. Wang Pa landed on the plains, 10-some bottomless cracks extending from his feet into the distance. Ah! A series of unpleasant and hoarse laughter came from the demon commander's helmet. This laughter was particularly arrogant and tyrannical, making it seem like one could see the savage smile on its face. Everyone says that you are a peerless genius of the human race, but today, it seems that you are only SOSO. Wang Pa said nothing. The hand holding the blade was trembling. There was a deep cut on the edge of the iron knife. Just who had lost? Had Wang Pa lost? The demon commander's laughter suddenly came to a halt. There was a muffled squelch. This sound was like a street performer of the capital spewing oil. Countless streams of blood flowed out from the cracks in the helmet. The color of this blood was extremely rich, mixed with a bizarre dark green. Some people had long ago suspected that the demon commander was a member of the imperial clan. Today, this fact had finally been proven. But why was its blood mixed with a dark green? No one thought about this question for the time being. The crowd was stunned speechless by what had happened. The demon commander was heavily injured, vomiting blood. You truly are very strong, even surpassing Byung Han before his death. The demon commander's voice became somewhat deeper, but it was not as unpleasant to hear as before. Although you are still no match for this commander must admit that it will be very difficult to kill you today. To the demons, killing Wang Po was even more important than killing the human commander. Since this mission could not be completed, since it had also suffered significant injuries, what use was there in remaining here? An order was sent from the summit of Mount Naoralang to the plains. The wolf cavalry began to organize themselves and prepare to retreat. The Mountly sect master glanced at Wang Po. Mao Qiuyu and Huairan also looked at Wang Po. What to do next would depend on Wang Po. As long as Wang Po nodded, the Mountly sect master's heaven-shrouding sword would descend to the summit of Mount Naoralang. Huairan was heavily injured, but she should still be able to detain the Duke of Shualao City, who had already been heavily injured by Mao Qiuyu. Meanwhile, Mao Qiuyu was responsible for keeping the 3rd and 8th demon generals on the plains. In this way, there really might be a chance to kill the demon commander. This seemed simple, but it was actually a complex method of alternating tactics. The human experts glanced at each other and made their arrangements. The wind blew against his robe, making a flapping sound. Wang Po did not nod, nor did he make any other movement, not even the tiniest of movements. He was like a stone statue. He did not want to give Mao Qiuyu and the others the wrong signal, as the consequences would be dire. Mao Qiuyu and the other two understood his meaning. They were somewhat worried, somewhat regretful, but they also relaxed a little. At this moment, the darkness surging out of the valley suddenly grew much fainter. Because the sun in the sky had become incomparably bright, a figure appeared in the blazing sunlight. Like a falling star, it crashed towards the demon commander on the peak. The Prince of Xiang. In his view, this was the best chance to kill the demon commander. No matter what, he could not let it go. Wang Po's expression instantly changed at this sight. Chapter 102. The water gurgled, and the wooden ladle was placed horizontally. The green leaf was still not back. Tonight's dinner was still as simple as before. Chun Chong Sheng and Go Han Shi's eating speed was slightly faster than usual. For the former, this was a very rare occurrence. From this, one could imagine how important the dossier they were going to read and the matter they were going to discuss tonight was. The plates on the table were taken away, and Anhua brought over some orange water for them to rinse their mouths with, as well as hot towels. In the corner of the side hall, there was a small mountain of dossiers. The ones they needed to read had already been selected and sorted out. The night was dark, and the palace was silent. Chun Chong Sheng and Go Han Shi looked at the files in their hands and didn't speak for a long time. They already knew the final outcome of that war, but they only saw the details now. No one could have imagined that the Prince of Xiang would silently abandon the 30,000 soldiers of the right camp of the Western Army and hide alone near the summit of Mount Wari. While the demon commander and Wang Po were both injured, he jumped out of the sun and launched the most decisive attack of his life. If this sneak attack was successful, it wouldn't be a big deal for him to leave the camp without permission. Moreover, he would receive the greatest contribution in this war so far. Whether the Prince of Xiang wanted to use this merit to exchange for Prince Chun Lu's departure from the capital or the honor of being exempted from death, it was all very easy. Perhaps it was precisely because he had thought of this that the Prince of Xiang had made such a risky and fearless move. Unfortunately, he still underestimated the demon commander's strength. Wang Po was heavily injured and could no longer fight. The demon commander had indeed suffered significant injuries, but she had not been burned to death by the blazing sun. The darkness in the valley became his weapon at the crucial moment. Those who saw the scene were shocked speechless. The Prince of Xiong was not willing to retreat, so his sneak attack became a forceful assault. The demon commander had used the mountain-toppling fiend as the price to flee Mount Noorlang. The Prince of Xiong stood on the head of the dead mountain-toppling fiend and watched the demon commander flee to the north. His confidence was reinvigorated, and his assault became a pursuit. This chase took him 600 li away, but he was still unable to kill the demon commander. This was because Black Robe had set up an array formation there, and there were 4 high-ranking demon generals waiting for him. If the Mountly Sect Master had not promptly arrived, the Prince of Xiong would have died on the spot. Even so, the Prince of Xiong and the Mountly Sect Master were still surrounded. Suddenly, a huge kite flew over from the sky. No one knew if Xiao Zhang was injured or where he was now, just like how no one knew where Zhixiu was or what he was doing. Some people are used to fighting alone. Since the start of the war, the most spectacular battle between sanctuary experts had come to an end. The demons had suffered grievous casualties. Of the 4 high-ranking demon generals that had tried to kill the Prince of Xiong and the Mountly Sect Master, only 2 had survived, and they had also lost a member of the Council of Elders and a duke. No human experts had perished, but Mao Qiuyu and Huai Run were both heavily injured, and the Mountly Sect Master's injuries were especially severe. Go Hanshi replied, "Master has returned to Mountly to recuperate from his injuries. The other seniors also need to rest for a while before they can return to the front lines." Experts of the divine domain were very difficult to kill, unless they were surrounded and attacked, or if they were facing an even higher level existence like the Tianhai Divine Empress. But because their injuries were too severe, they were still forced to stop. Wampa was no exception. From Chen Changsheng's perspective, this was Black Robe's intention. Even if he had to pay an extremely heavy price, he still wanted the human experts of the divine domain to temporarily lose the ability to fight. At the very least, they would not be able to use their full strength until the winter arrived. Without the experts of the divine domain, the advance of the human armies would be greatly hindered. Just how much longer would their journey, which was already much slower than originally planned, be delayed? When the human armies truly reached Xuelao City, would the drifting snowflakes still give them any chance? To use the deaths of 2 experts of the divine domain and 2 high-ranking demon generals to buy 10 some days of time in the overall scheme was not something a normal person could possess. Every time they thought of this, Chen Changsheng and Go Hanshi would feel wary of the young demon lord, even faintly respect him. The most frightening was still Black Robe. From his calculations, he had probably long ago calculated all the details of the battle between the demon commander and Wang Pe. He had calculated which human experts would appear, even calculated that the Prince of Xiong would leave the western camp on his own. It could only be said that his understanding of the human mind had already reached a terrifying level. If the battle around Mount Noorlang had ended like this, Black Robe could have at least declared his victory in the second phase of the war. But in reality, he had lost. The human armies had broken through the demons' second line of defense earlier than expected. Before the summer had even completely ended, the 3 cavalrymen at the very front could already see the silhouette of Xuelao City in the distance. This was because during the Battle of Mount Noorlang, a few unexpected changes had occurred on the battlefield. The most important person in this battle was the commander-in-chief of the human armies, Divine General He Ming. Everyone believed that Divine General He Ming's appointment as commander-in-chief of the human armies was the result of a political compromise, or perhaps a random order from the emperor and the pope on a whim. Moreover, just like in that war several hundred years ago, ordinary soldiers other than the black-armored heavy cavalry had little effect on the outcome of the battle, unless one was Wang Jitze. But Divine General He Ming had played an extremely important role in this battle. On that day, when the battle was at its most intense, the plains in a radius of several hundred li in front of the mountain had become the battlefield of experts of the divine domain. Divine General He Ming's decision to place the Central Army tent at the very front was not a wise decision, especially at a time like this. The terrifying shockwaves from a battle between experts of the divine domain were also very harmful to ordinary soldiers. Relying on the protection of the formation to isolate the auras of the sanctuary experts, the soldiers launched a relentless counterattack against the wolf cavalry of the demon race. However, the situation had already become extremely perilous. The howling winds were like invisible plows, tearing tents apart from time to time and sending rocks flying into the air. Who knew how many soldiers were smashed into bloody heads? A massive hole had been torn in the central army tent, wind and sand constantly pouring in. The tallow candles had been extinguished long ago, and only the night pearls still emitted light, illuminating the gloomy map. Divine General He Ming gazed at the map, his expression extremely calm. He calmly issued order after order, and then the orderlies would rush off. Every time the wolf cavalry charged, they would get a little closer to the central army tent. In the last attack, the huge alpha wolf was less than 2 miles away from the central tent. Yi Xiaolian gazed at the profile of Divine General He Ming, a complicated expression in her eyes. She had proposed many times to retreat, but Divine General He Ming had never agreed. Even more confusing to her was that after a certain order, even the sacred light crossbows responsible for suppressing the charge of the wolf cavalry had become much sparser. The sword array formed by 300-some South Stream Temple disciples was just outside the camp. Even if the wolf cavalry charged, even if that Duke of Shualao City fighting with her martial granduncle outside the camp attacked, she was confident that she could protect this divine general. The problem was, how many South Stream Temple disciples would die? Just as she was thinking these questions, Divine General He Ming suddenly asked a question. At the time, everyone in the tent had found this question very strange. Where is the demi-human North Pacifying Army? A staff officer froze for a moment before replying. A few days ago, they left Song Province. They just left Song Province. Divine General He Ming sighed, appearing extremely regretful. They're too far away, so we'll have to do it ourselves. Yi Xiaolian was very confused, thinking, even if the demi-human reinforcements arrived long ago, would they really be able to save you? In the end, those stories of tens of thousands of cavalry charging out of the valleys were just stories. Unless they were like the demons and had spent several centuries laying down arrays and paths, in this world where red falcons and demon vultures flew together, it would be very difficult for such a sneak attack to occur. Once they're done fighting, it'll be our turn. Divine General He Ming raised his head, his gaze piercing through the tattered roof of the tent to the sky. Massive figures were faintly discernible in the thick black smoke, the bright sword glows seeming to come from another world. This was the world of divine domain experts. Yi Xiaolian still did not understand the meaning of Divine General He Ming's words. She subconsciously turned to the darkest corner of the tent. Chapter 103. After Wang Pe and the demon commander clashed, the first to move was not the Prince of Xiang, who had jumped out of the sun, nor was it Black Robe, who had been hiding behind a crafty scheme. It was Divine General He Ming. He rubbed his tired face and walked to the door of the central army tent, gazing into the distance. The wolf cavalry had stopped their attacks, transforming into streams of darkness that retreated into the darkness beneath Mount Noorlang. The demon commander had fled in defeat, the Prince of Xiang had followed, and the Mount Li sect master had pursued. Huairun was sitting on the ground recovering from her injuries. Mao Qiuyu was blocking the 3rd and 8th demon generals, and Wang Pe was standing motionless. The Duke of Shualao City landed on the grassland, kicking up mud as he struggled to his feet. His body was covered in wounds, and he looked like he was about to die. You are the commander-in-chief of the human race. The Duke stared at Divine General He Ming, madness in his eyes as he said, Then your luck today is truly very bad. Although he was about to die, although He Ming was also a star condensation expert, the threshold to the divine domain was truly very high. He really could still kill Divine General He Ming. The girls of South Stream Temple surrounded the central army tent like scattered white flowers. They had not expected this expert of the divine domain to fall from the sky, and for a moment, they were rather flustered. Yi Xiaolian was not panicked. She clearly shouted, Withdraw. Divine General He Ming said, Disperse. His voice was very calm, but it was also very firm. Yi Xiaolian was very confused, even angry, but when she recalled the temple master's orders, she clenched her teeth and yelled, "All disciples, disperse!" White flowers bloomed and drifted away, the surrounding tents collapsing with them. Several hundred crossbowmen, armed with sacred light crossbows, aimed at the blood-covered Duke of Xiulao City. Several hundred crossbow bolts imbued with sacred light shot out, forming a pillar of light several feet wide that pierced through his body. The majority of the Duke's demon body had vanished. He lowered his head to look at his own body, a hint of confusion in his eyes. Dense footsteps shattered the silence as the cavalry returned from the battlefield. Before the crowd could even get over the shock and astonishment brought about by the sight before them, they heard an even more shocking order. Divine General He Ming ordered, "We will depart in 60 seconds. A deputy general asked in shock, "My lord, where?" Divine General He Ming replied, "Of course, Xiulao City." He said this very matter-of-factly. Yi Xiaolian was very shocked. She suddenly recalled the young master of the Tang clan on the Divine Avenue many years ago, and then she recalled the senior Su Li that the temple master would occasionally mention. The specific arrangements were naturally left to the staff, officers, and other generals. Divine General He Ming walked back to the tent and came to the gloomy corner. He softly said, "It's been hard on the holy maiden." Su Yurong opened her eyes and looked at him, asking, "How confident are you?" For the past few days, she had not closed her eyes for many days and nights. She was extremely exhausted. Today, she had wanted to have a good sleep, but in the end, she had been dragged into the storeroom by the Mount Li sect master to chat with. With great difficulty, the Mount Li sect master had left, so she had hidden herself here. Leaning against the box, she had wanted to take a nap, but before she could sleep for long, the battle outside had ended, and someone had come to bother her. She hadn't slept well, so she wasn't in a good mood. Naturally, she spoke rudely. Divine General He Ming thought it over and said, 30%. Su Yurong thought about it and said, "That's enough." Divine General He Ming sighed ruefully. Discussing matters with the Holy Maiden is truly delightful. Su Yurong said, "You're right. If it's Chun Changsheng who comes, then it'll be troublesome." She took out an object made of bronze from her sleeve. It was the magical artifact Shang Xingzhou had made from the clear sky mirror. She was not intending to contact the capital, because the other magical artifact was not in Chun Changsheng's hands, but in Xue He's. She told Xue He two things. First, the Prince of Xiang was heavily injured and would not be able to return to the West Nine camp in the short term. Second, Commander-in-Chief He Ming had requested that the entire Western Army advance. Within 3 days, they had to reach the center of the Bunnan Highlands and capture Saoyuo City. Xue He was probably well aware of the meaning of these two words, and he had obtained the joint guarantee of Divine General He Ming and Su Yurong. Just as expected, later that day, Xue He went to the right camp, seized the Prince of Xiang's military authority, and then led the West Nine camp north. The Central Army and Eastern Army also began to move. The fastest was the vanguard of the Eastern Army, the North Third Camp. They marched for a day and night, bypassing the Starry Gorge and seizing the Five Platforms River, thus seizing the most important military pass on the southern side of the Bunna Highlands. With this as a breakthrough point, the human army advanced with unimaginable speed, forcefully cutting the second defense line of the demons into 3. The most important factor was time. The 17 days lost in the first campaign had been completely seized back in this process. Blackrobe's strategy could be described as a complete failure. Qin Changsheng put down the file in his hand and fell into a daze. Reading on paper, he still felt it to be shallow. The North Third Camp of the Left Army marched for a day and night, bypassing the Starry Gorge and seizing the Five Platforms River. It was just a short sentence on paper, but in the real world, what sort of heroic and courageous story was this? The most important reason is that when the demons attacked, the North Third Camp did not suffer any losses. Go Hanshi thought of the 3 names at the very top of the list of military achievements and smiled. It was not because they had rendered a great service or won glory for Mount Li, but because they were still alive and well. Crucially, Why did those several thousand vultures that had flown out of the cliff suddenly fall to the plains and burn themselves to death? The officers and soldiers on the front lines could not understand this problem, and Liang Banhu had also expressed his confusion in the private message he had sent back. Seeing Chun Chongsheng's expression, Go Hanshi vaguely guessed at the truth, but since Chun Chongsheng did not mention it, it was not convenient for him to say anything. Although the story between the Pope and his protector had not caused a ruckus, everyone who needed to know knew. After all, starting from that autumn, no one had seen that black-clothed girl at Chun Chongsheng's side. When he thought about how she had left the warm islands of the south and gone to the snowy plains that her father had once set foot on, Chun Chongsheng felt rather complex. Then he noticed that Go Hanshi was smirking at him. He felt rather awkward. Thinking of something, he changed the subject. What did that demon freak in the cliff constantly shout before he died? Didn't Suli leave? Go Hanshi said with a smile. I'm saying that this is what that demon shouted. He should be a member of the ghost-driving tribe of the demon race, most skilled at controlling monsters. He's even more terrifying than the shamans of the south. I heard that he was pursued by Marshal Granduncle for many years and was already extinct. I didn't think that he would still be alive. Why had Suli pursued the ghost-driving tribe? There were no records in the Mount Li sword sect, so Go Hanshi did not know, and Chun Chongsheng could not guess. They glanced at each other and thought of a possibility. Perhaps Suli had seen the importance of that tribe to the war several hundred years ago. Perhaps it really was like this. Because before he left this world, Suli had always been fighting the demons. It was not fighting, but war. What about that fellow who had been fighting the demons since he was born? Chun Chongsheng very much wanted to know just where Zhixio was. Go Hanshi was also very concerned, because Zhixio was now Mount Li's son-in-law. The front lines had their own methods of recording military achievements. What they now knew was that Zhixio had killed 10-some demon soldiers since the start of the war. To an ordinary soldier, this was already a military achievement worth being proud of, but it seemed rather strange when placed on Zhixio. His abilities were definitely not limited to this. Just where was he? What was he doing? It seems that I'll have to go early. Chun Chongsheng said to Go Hanshi. In the spring, Go Hanshi had said to him that he could only leave the capital when he could see Shuilao City. Although those 3 cavalrymen could already see Shuilao City, the human army was still very far away. Why did he have to go now? Because although the human army had obtained victory in this battle, in other aspects, the demons had also barely managed to achieve their objectives. The vast majority of the human experts of the divine domain, Wang Po included, had suffered heavy injuries and would not be able to fight again in the short term. At a time like this, it was very easy for a soldier's mentality to become unstable because experts of the divine domain represented confidence. If Chun Chongsheng appeared on the front lines now, he would be extremely effective in stabilizing the morale of the army. If Su Yurong appeared with him, the effect would be even more obvious. Chun Chongsheng said, "As long as His Majesty is in the imperial palace, the capital will not fall into chaos, nor will the hearts of the people." This time, Go Hanshi did not object, because the current situation was already very different from the spring. The capital had already welcomed the true summer. As the wind blew through the city, it was filtered by the Luo River and the willow trees by the river, cooling it down a little. However, when it encountered the red walls of the palace, it became hot and dry. Mou's face was slightly red, and her temples were a little sweaty. Her left hand was constantly fanning herself with a handkerchief. The button around her neck was not properly fastened, revealing a portion of her pure white skin. Chun Chongsheng sat across from her. As he gazed at the tea in his cup, he felt like a flower was about to bloom. Chapter 104. Chun Chongsheng had already bid farewell to his senior brother. Before he left, he naturally had to see her. In the past, Mou had been an extremely famous beauty of the capital, and now she was even more beautiful and moving. He knew that she was not trying to seduce him, but this place was truly too hot. Even the cooling array in the hall seemed to be of no use. This place is too small. He looked around and said, this was a room in the back of the hall that had been specially partitioned off. Compared to the architecture of the imperial palace, it truly was very small and not very well ventilated. Before the empress hung the curtain to oversee politics, she studied government affairs with Emperor Xian for 20-some years and always sat here. Mou mocked. When His Majesty first entered the palace, the venerable Taoist also sat here during the court conference. Now that I'm sitting here, do I have the right to be dissatisfied? Chen Changsheng bitterly smiled. Then it truly is hard to say. Mou arched her brows. Do all of you think that I'm very ambitious? There was a time when Chen Changsheng truly did think that she was very ambitious, not when the Divine Empress was still alive, but 10 years ago. She had always maintained contact with him. When His Majesty ordered her to return to the capital, she had written a rather hesitant letter. Later on, he realized that she had already made up her mind. But when she insisted on marrying the Prince of Luoyang, Chen Changsheng felt that his view of her was perhaps not correct. If she really was ambitious, she should have married someone with even more authority. She could have even married the emperor and become the new empress. That depends on what you mean by ambition, Chen Changsheng said. Mou replied, if ambition means power, then I admit that I have a very strong desire in this aspect, but I only need to be able to guarantee that I have the right to meddle in the affairs of the court. These words were rather convoluted. Chen Changsheng thought it over and finally understood. He curiously asked, why do you like to handle government affairs so much? Because I'm a female official taught by the Empress. Mou looked at him and said, you're wrong, and I were taught by the Empress. I like it and have the ability to handle government affairs, while she is more skilled in massacring everyone. Chen Changsheng thought of the many scenes from these past few years and could only silently agree to these words. Mou said, of course, she's even more like the Empress than I am. Perhaps it's because she's more capable of killing people than I am. 10-some years ago, in the nearby palace hall, the Tianhai Divine Empress had once told her and Su Yorong that killing was the correct path. Mou knew that she couldn't do it. Perhaps it was because she had seen too many of her clansmen being killed when she was young. That year on the road of peace, when she chopped Zhou Tong with her sword until his entire body was covered in blood, it seemed like she had used up all the killing intent in her body. Chen Changsheng didn't want to continue this topic and asked, after so many years of marriage, is he still so afraid of you? He was asking the Prince of Luoyang. Mou raised her eyebrows and said, that's out of respect, not fear. Do you think everyone is like you? Chen Changsheng didn't think that he would get into trouble and felt a little awkward. Mou let him go and said, he's learning to cook at home every day. He just learned his 17th method of steeping radish. He looks very happy. Chen Changsheng saw that she was also very happy. He was also very happy, but also a bit complicated. He looked at the hair on her temples and looked away. He picked up the teacup and took a sip, asking, have you been sleeping well recently? Mou beamed with joy and said, very good. You know what? Even a fat person's body is cold, so hugging him is very comfortable. On the way to the front lines, Chen Changsheng couldn't help but laugh at himself every time he recalled what had happened that day in the imperial palace. This sort of scene occurred far too often, making Hua rather nervous. Fu Xinji and Chun Fuge, now teachers of the Orthodox Academy, were also very uneasy. Chen Changsheng had not brought too many Li Palace priests with him, but many students from the Ivy Academies. He was using the excuse of patrolling while the students from the Ivy Academies were using the excuse of practicing on the front lines. Not long after entering Tianliang County, before they had even reached Xuanyang City, Chen Changsheng took Hua and left the procession. The records of the various Taoist churches were constantly being delivered to his hands. He also saw with his own eyes the true situation among the people, saw soldiers recovering from their wounds, and then saw the plains. Before entering the real battlefield, he once more recalled Mou's final words in the imperial palace. It's already been 2 months since the people of the capital have had meat to eat. This year, only 3 ships of cotton have arrived at Luling. If you lose at the front lines, countless refugees will appear this winter. Countless people will freeze to death on the road. This is a war between countries, a war fought with the strength of a country. so you must win. Otherwise, if you lose, your country will be destroyed. Yes, this was a war between countries. Both sides would have to throw in all their strength, disregarding all costs to strive for the final victory. But there were some things that Shang still did not understand. He and Go Hanshi had discussed them many times, but they had not come to a convincing conclusion. In both the first and second stages of the war, the methods used by the demons were far too violent. Even for a war between countries, they were still somewhat excessive. Logically speaking, no one would choose to destroy indiscriminately at the start of a war. Even if the demons were relatively weaker, why would they be so lacking in confidence? Moreover, this method had no chance of changing the resolve of the humans. So what meaning did it have other than hastening the defeat of the demons? It was very difficult for those involved to clearly see the entire situation, not even the demon lord or the demon commander. The perspective of an outsider actually made it easier for them to see certain problems. For example, Shang Xingzhou had long ago noticed that something was off that Chen Changsheng and Go Hanshi felt. A group was traveling from Mount Han to Mount Li, stopping for a night in Luoyang. On the morning of the next day, Shang Xingzhou left Luoyang. No one knew of this matter. He only brought with him a young Taoist boy carved from ice and jade. 10 some years ago, Xining Village's old temple had become a place of great importance to the protection of the imperial court, but which soldier could stop him? He brought the young Taoist boy into the old temple. After a moment of silence, he ordered the young Taoist boy to continue reciting the canon of flowing west under the tree, and then he left the temple and went to the stream bank. The stream water was just as clear as it had been in the past. The falling flowers flowed with the waves, adding to their liveliness as they passed by him. A monk appeared on the bank of the stream. He was still the same as he was 10 some years ago. His face was handsome, and it was impossible to tell his exact age. He wore a black monk's robe, its surface covered in cracks and dust. Shang Xingzhou said to him, "Your Highness, I wish to know a few things." This monk was the king of Chu's son. In terms of seniority, he was Yuren's uncle. If he were still in the court, he would naturally be a prince. If not for the coup of the 100 Garden, perhaps he would now be the emperor. Of course, Shang Xingzhou would never admit it. The monk said, "Please speak." Shang Xingzhou asked, "Just what does the sacred light continent want to do?" The monk said nothing. Shang Xingzhou indifferently said, "In the end, you are still a person on our side." The compassion in the monk's eyes completely transformed into desolation. Nothing more than a wanderer without a home to return to. Shang Xingzhou suddenly said, "Tianhai heavily injured your soul and prevented you from returning. Now that I think about it, it wasn't a bad thing." These words were clearly suspecting that he was conspiring with the sacred light continent. The monk said, "Imperial hegemony will come to nothing." Shang Xingzhou said, "One has to consider the future generations. No matter what, it is still the blood of the Chen clan." The monk was quiet for a very long time, then asked, "Is this your promise? If I die, my students will bring you back." Shang Xingzhou seemed to think of something. After a moment of silence, he added, "If they refuse, I will have this student bring you back." The monk turned to the young Taoist boy under the tree and revealed a satisfied expression. "What do you want me to do?" Shang Xingzhou said, "I want you to help me send a message, and also a thing." The monk said, "The sacred light continent is too far away. That will require a very long time." Shang Xingzhou said, "It's just an idle move." The monk asked what message. Shang Xingzhou said, "Tell Su Li that something has happened." The monk said, "I really don't know what will happen to the sacred light continent." Shang Xingzhou said, "I also don't know what will happen, but I think that he probably knows that something is happening here." The monk fell silent for a while, then asked, "Thing?" Shang Xingzhou handed over a sword. The sword was wrapped in cloth, and in the middle was a ring forged from melted bronze. The monk took the sword, his fingers gripping the bronze ring. He was extremely careful not to touch any other part of the sword. "A good sword." The monk's gaze fell on the bronze ring, and he sighed. "Such a treasure was actually melted by you to send a sword through space. Truly extravagant." The heaven-shrouding sword was naturally a good sword. The The bronze was a fragment of the clear sky mirror. Chapter 105. The war had entered its third phase and also its cruelest phase. The two sides were getting closer and closer, the battles were getting more and more frequent, and the casualties were increasing. Strategy and tactics were becoming less and less useful in this phase. Willpower and resources became the most important factors, and it was only a matter of which side gave out first. 1,000 li from Shuilao City was a cliff on the plains, and there were many hot springs in the mountains. The capital was very hot, but the weather here was rather cool. The mist exuded by the hot springs permeated the mountains, making for a rather pleasant sight. Chun Changsheng sat in the hot spring, his gaze piercing through the mist, the curtains, and the banners of the orthodoxy cavalry to the path leading out of the valley. Many years ago, he had been prepared to leave through this path, but in the end, he had still turned back and seen the unconscious Su Li. Yes, this was the hot spring from back then, but at the time, all he could see was snow. Now, his eyes were filled with an endless green, making him feel rather unfamiliar. "Your Holiness, it's time." And Hua squatted by the hot spring and said, her voice very soft and gentle as if she was afraid of startling him. Chun Changsheng came to his senses and stood up from the hot spring. She took an enormous towel and wrapped it around his body, carefully wiping it clean. And Hua looked at his face and felt somewhat comforted, thinking, the hot spring truly does have its uses. She helped him out of the hot spring and into the pavilion up ahead to rest. The pavilion and a few other buildings in the mountain had all been newly built just a few days ago. Qin Changsheng was not used to such a lavish display in a time of war. He believed that this would make many ordinary soldiers angry. To his surprise, the soldiers passing by from the plains and seeing this sight were not dissatisfied. On the contrary, they felt that it was only right and proper, even very proud. Qin Changsheng thought for a very long time, but still could not understand why. He sat in the pavilion and gazed into the distance. In the distant plains, many soldiers were currently advancing in the direction of Shuilao City. Even at this distance, he seemed to be able to hear the dragon horses. Yes, they really did seem to be from Sloping Cliff Horse Farm. The soldiers knew that the Pope was in this stone mountain, but they didn't know if he could see this pavilion. The news had long ago spread across the front lines. When passing by this stone mountain, unless it was an urgent military matter, the cavalry would dismount and lead the way. There were also many soldiers who would ignore military orders and run out of their ranks, kneeling and kowtowing to the stone mountain. Only then would they contentedly return to their ranks, not even caring if they were punished by their superiors. Qin Changsheng had seen this scene many times. He couldn't understand why these ordinary soldiers would think that he was proud, but since they wanted to see him, he was willing to let them see him. So in the past few days, he would often sit under the pavilion, even if in Hua, Linghai Zhuang, and the others objected. A cool breeze entered the mountain from the plains. Before it could be warmed by the hot spring, it landed on Chun Changsheng's face. His body, which had heated up after being soaked in the hot spring, gradually cooled down. The redness on his face gradually faded, and he became pale again. He was very thin and haggard. The cold wind blew again, and the white crane landed. Then it flew to the pavilion and stood on one leg. It squinted its eyes so that the soldiers in the distant wilderness could see it more clearly. Su Yurong walked to the edge of the cliff and looked down at the springs that were like steaming pots. She said, "If you continue like this, you will die before the city is breached." She didn't turn around to look at Chun Changsheng, and her face didn't show any expression. It was as if she was just casually saying it and didn't really care. Or maybe it was because she had already said it many times, but Chun Changsheng didn't respond. After coming to the front lines, Chun Changsheng had already refined 2 bottles of cinnabar pills. Everyone understood what this meant. He naturally understood it the best, but when he saw so many young faces contorted in fear of death and heard so many sobs, he had no choice but to do this. And he had been injured. This was the front lines. Although he was the Pope and was heavily protected, he was also a prime target of the demon race. The most dangerous time had been when the second demon general had led a group of demon experts and use vultures to conduct an aerial assault. He had also suffered significant injuries in that battle. In the midsummer, he had come to this plain, and Shualao City was already faintly visible. It was now the beginning of autumn, and it was said that the vanguard could already clearly see the walls of Shualao City. The North Third Camp could even clearly see the faces of the soldiers defending the city, but in the end, no one had truly reached Shualao City. The closer they got to Shualao City, the firmer the demons' will to resist, the more fearless they became of death. Many soldiers even felt that this mission was impossible to complete. It was clear that with just a little more pressure, the demon lord in Shualao City and the hundreds of thousands of tribal warriors outside the city might not be able to hold on. But at this moment, many people in the human army could no longer hold on. On the same night, a few soldiers who could no longer hold on were forced to retreat south, the vast majority of them heavily injured. Yi Xiaolian led several disciples, the teachers of the 13 divisions of Radiant Green, and 3 clergymen of the Li Palace, escorting a single person back south. Just who was this person that could make her leave the most important central army tent and put on such a grand display of force? Even the heavily injured prince of Xiang, stripped of his military authority, was still persisting on the front lines. Why was this person so important? No one knew what Yi Xiaolian was thinking, but to the Li Palace clergymen and the teachers of the 13 divisions of Radiant Green, this person was naturally many times more important than the Prince of Xiang, because he was the Pope's friend. Chen Changsheng was not good with words, and his way of thinking was overly simple. In a certain person's words, it was easy to make people speechless, but from Xining village to the capital, he had still made a few friends. But when speaking of his friends, many people's first reaction would definitely be Tang 36. Tang 36's cheeks were already sunken in, but they were still bright red like a cooked prawn. His eyes were also extremely bright, making one feel somewhat flustered. Chen Changsheng sat by the stretcher and said to him, "When you wanted to buy that restaurant, I felt that it was inappropriate." Tang 36 weakly asked, "What was inappropriate about it?" Chen Changsheng replied, "Eating too many blue lobsters will cause you to suffer retribution. Look at you now." It was obvious that although Tang 36 had been seriously ill in the last few days, he still frequently looked at himself in the mirror and flaunted his beauty, so he was able to quickly understand Chen Changsheng's joke. Once he understood the joke, he naturally had a laugh. Tang 36 laughed and coughed at the same time, looking very uncomfortable. Yi Xiaolian placed the ice towel on his forehead and turned her head to glare at Chen Changsheng. Only after glaring at him did she realize what she had done. She couldn't help but panic and repeatedly beg for forgiveness. Chen Changsheng naturally did not care about her. "Yurong is next door. Go see her." Yi Xiaolian softly agreed, but she became even more nervous. She thought to herself, "How should I explain this to the Holy Maiden?" After Yi Xiaolian left, Tang 36 looked into Chen Changsheng's eyes and asked, "Just what kind of illness do I have?" Chen Changsheng replied, "Your mind is too exhausted, and the cold has entered your internal organs. It's very serious." Tang 36's eyes were like will-o'-the-wisps. "I think there's a problem with this illness. I've seriously thought about it, and feel that I still need to love all of you even more and write even more seriously. Thank you, everyone." Chapter 106. Chen Changsheng smiled and said, "I know you are not satisfied, but there is no problem." Tang 36 was silent for a while and said, "You are the best doctor. If you can't cure me, where else can I go?" Chen Changsheng said, "I'm not good at colds, and the cinnabar pill isn't effective." Tang 36 sneered, "Even if you give me that thing to eat, I won't eat it because I don't eat people." Chen Changsheng said, "So you need to go back and treat your illness first." Tang 36 was silent for a while, then said, "Our gatekeeper has aged a lot. Without my help, I'm worried that his body won't be able to hold on." Chen Changsheng placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "I will discuss this with someone. You leave first. Principal Mao is recuperating in Mount Han. You should also go there." The next morning, Tang 36 left, and Yi Xiaolian left with him. This was agreed upon by Su Yurong.
She didn't tell Chen Changsheng because she knew that Chen Changsheng was very slow when it came to these kinds of matters between men and women. In other words, he didn't understand at all. However, she also knew that Chen Changsheng was very knowledgeable in other areas, such as medicine. She glanced at him but didn't say anything. Chen Changsheng looked at the fluttering flag in the distance. His expression was calm and determined. He looked at the world under the pavilion. The world was also watching him. His calmness gave the countless soldiers at the front line confidence. In fact, very few people knew that his heart was not at peace. There were many things that he almost couldn't bear, such as those life-and-death situations, and Tang 36's high fever that couldn't be brought down. Fortunately, he had someone to rely on. Su Yorong had always stood by his side, not as a wife, nor as a subordinate, but as an equal. When she clasped her hands behind her, Ling Hai Zhuang and the others even felt that she was taller than Chen Changsheng. This morning, we received news that senior brother Liang is dead. 2 of the Sword Hall elders died in battle. Guanbai went to reinforce them, but he also died. Su Yorong's expression was very calm, as though the news of these deaths had nothing to do with her. Chen Changsheng closed his eyes and opened them after a while. Everyone will die. As long as we can solve the problem in the end, this kind of death is not a waste. It is meaningful and merciful. After saying this, she walked down the mountain. The gazes of Ling Hai Zhuang and the priests followed her, filled with reverence and pity. The soldiers and believers at the front line needed strength from Chen Changsheng's calmness. Chen Changsheng needed to obtain power from her. So who could she rely on? Now, even in Hua was beginning to pity her and worship her. Shuilao City was very large, and with the tinsum citadels and the tents set up by the tribal warriors who had rushed over from all over, it took up an even larger area. When the southern part of the city was just ushered in by the chilly wind, the fields in the north of the city had already begun to be covered in snow, but there was still no trace of the human army. Zhishio was extremely confident that he was the first human to come to these plains. If he could be considered a human, it was not because he was braver or more adventurous than the other soldiers, but because to the human army, coming to the plains to the north of Shuilao City was meaningless to the overall situation of the battle. But this was very meaningful to him in the battle. 7 days ago, he had encountered a demon squad in the ruins of the ancient beast arena, 120 li to the west of Shuilao City. He had been fighting demons since he was a child, so his understanding of the demon race far surpassed that of an ordinary person. A few details had made him notice the uniqueness of the leader of this squad. This leader was very young and very tall. From the style of the clan insignia he wore, he probably belonged to a clan very close to the imperial clan, and he probably had a very high status in the clan. Why would such a young noble appear on the dangerous battlefield? This was not in line with Zhishio's understanding of the upper class of demon society. If it had been 1,000 some years ago, the demon nobles would still have maintained a martial ethos, relying on bravery and military achievements as the source of their glory. But now they had long since decayed. Zhishio continued to follow this demon squad and ultimately reached a conclusion. This young noble had left the city under the protection of the experts of his clan in order to accumulate military merit, but he did not want to encounter any danger. Thus, this squad had only stopped at the ruins of the ancient beast arena for half a day before beginning to advance north. Everyone knew that the human armies would not be able to circle around to the north of Shuilao City in a short period of time and launch an attack. As for how this young noble would be able to produce enough military merit when he returned to Shuilao City, Zhishio was confident that this would be an extremely easy task for him. Perhaps the heads of several dozen human soldiers were already prepared, just waiting for him to return to the city and load them onto the carriage being dragged by the earth-imprisoning beast. Shuilao City was already in a perilous moment, yet the nobles in the city were still thinking of swindling military merit. Zhishio didn't know if they were stupid or overly greedy, but anyone who dared to play such tricks at this moment was undoubtedly a truly powerful figure of the demon race. That young noble probably had an extraordinary status. From the moment he reached this conclusion, Zhishio felt an intense impulse.
And then he formulated an extremely risky plan for this impulse. He decided to infiltrate Xiuelao City. A pack of monsters came out of nowhere and began to attack the demon squad. With the experts of his clan protecting him, the young noble was not worried about his own safety. He was even in the mood to watch the blood vessels in the necks of those irascible monsters be cut. His pale face was flushed with excitement, as if he had been smeared with real blood. The monsters were all killed, but the demon squad had also paid a price. 3 of their bravest soldiers had suffered significant injuries, and most troublesome of all was that the snow and mud on the plains had been trampled into a pulp, mixing together and making it difficult to walk through. The squad decided to camp in the forest and stay for the night, using blood pigeons to send a message. The demon warrior and the young nobleman in the squad did not expect that this night would become the most terrifying night of their lives. The stench of blood gradually spread through the forest, and some monster seemed to be moving through the wet mud. The world was silent, and the clouds in the night sky gradually parted. The clearly visible moon could not give them any courage. They could only hear each other's gasps and feel that the weapons in their hands were getting colder and colder. Gradually, the gasp stopped, and they could no longer feel the coldness of the weapons in their hands, because their bodies were slowly becoming ice cold. As it turned out, this was also the last night of their lives. The demon soldiers in the squad silently died. There were no warnings, no screams, no struggles, and certainly no fighting. The entire process was like an extremely bizarre pantomime, but there was no audience. Only the sparse stars in the south and the white moon witnessed it all. On the morning of the next day, according to the agreement, a squad of cavalry from Xiuelao City entered the forest. 10 some fully armored cavalry escorted 3 large carriages. The carriages filled with the corpses of human soldiers that they had painstakingly found in the south. When they thought about the rewards that their young master was about to bestow upon them, these cavalry found it difficult to maintain their dignified and cold expressions, their lips curling into the sweetest smiles. But when they entered the forest, they did not see that tall figure, only an incomparably tragic sight. Weeping could be heard without end as the demon knights brandished their weapons at the sky, venting the unease and fear in their hearts, narrating their sorrow, and swearing to take revenge for Gruel. It was hard to say whether Gruel was the young noble's name or the prefix of his entire clan. Soon after, they lifted the corpses of their companions from the forest onto the carriages and began their journey back to Xiuelao City, not daring to linger for too long. Of course, they used the excuse that they needed to return to the city as quickly as possible to warn that the human armies had already arrived in the north on the journey back to the city. The demon knights once more fell into an intense dispute, probably over how to respond to the clan leader's inquiry and how to use gold to redeem their crimes. The mood of the squad became even more downcast, so much so that when they passed through the needle-leaf forest, they even forgot to take the venison that they had agreed on when they came. As they got closer and closer to Xiuelao City, they could see more and more dilapidated buildings. The majority of the houses were barely made from felt and wood. They were clearly very weak, leaking air everywhere, and there was no sense of beauty to speak of, if not for the fact that the low-level demons could endure the bitter cold. They would have never been able to survive. Upon hearing the hurried galloping, the low-level demons that were chopping wood and working hurriedly kneeled to the sides of the road, not even daring to raise their heads. In normal times, these knights might have been interested in using their leather whips to make these low-level demons feel pain, but they were in no mood at this moment. They wanted nothing more than to immediately return to Xiuelao City. Of course, if they could, they would even more like never to return to Xiuelao City. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to cast a recommendation vote or monthly vote at Chidian. Your support is my greatest motivation. Mobile users, please go to M. Chapter 107. Whether it was willing or not, Xiuelao City would always be there, waiting for the returning wanderers or foreigners with ill intentions. The human armies were still in the south. The gate to the north was slightly more tightly guarded, but it was still possible to enter and leave as usual. The carriage pulled by the earth-imprisoning beast drew many gazes as it rolled over the stones. The demons stared at the tall corpse in the carriage, their pale faces and dark blue eyes brimming with shock as they loudly yelled. The demons had many languages, and the different classes of Shualao City often used different languages, but at this moment, the majority of their cries contained similar syllables. No one noticed that there was a very long wound on the tall corpse, a small hole in the chest that just happened to be hidden by the shadow of the leather robe. If someone were to get close, they might see an extremely strange and terrifying sight. There was an eye in the small hole. Its eyes were very calm and devoid of emotion, but it was clearly alive. The grandson of the enormous Gru, Zheshio compared it to the top-secret information he had read in the army and understood who the young noble who had died at his hand was, so he no longer thought about it. Through the small hole in the young noble's body, he took measure of the streets and buildings of Shualao City. The humans and high-class demons looked rather similar on the outside, but they were two completely different species. The two sides had fought for tens of thousands of years and had long ago formed an irreconcilable blood feud. Whether it was in terms of material or spirit, the two sides were completely cut off from each other. Only during the era of Grand Scholar Tungus had they had a very short period of very limited interaction. Over the countless years, only a very small number of demons had appeared in the capital, and the vast majority had met extremely miserable ends. As for the humans, ever since Wang Jitse signed a truce with the Demon Lord, no human had been able to take a single step into Shualao City. Zheshio could be said to be the first person in several hundred years to enter Shualao City. Shualao City was strange to the humans, evil, the nest of devils, the abyss of sin. So just what was it? Zheshio only knew that the walls of the city were extremely high, several times higher than those of Luoyang. Even though he had been in the city for a very long time, he could still clearly see the moss and snow on the walls. The streets here were straight and wide, the buildings also very large. The vast majority of them were built from stone. They seemed rather crude, but they also had an indescribable sense of beauty. Every once in a while, he could see a building with a pointed roof. He didn't know what it was for, but it gave off a majestic and sacred feeling. After walking for a long time, the sky gradually brightened and it was noon. Suddenly, the sunlight was blocked, leaving behind a patch of darkness. Zheshio saw a black monolith. It was unknown what material the black stone tablet was made of, but when one looked at it, it seemed to be cleansed by sucking. As if it had been inspected, the earth-imprisoning beast continued to advance. More and more black monoliths entered Zheshio's eyes. Every 10 samjong, he could see one towering between the green hills. Because his line of sight was blocked, he could not see the entire scene, but from what he could see, he could imagine just how spectacular it was. There were black tablets everywhere on the green hill. It looked like a huge graveyard, but it also looked like some kind of sacrificial array. Zheshio felt the young noble's corpse being lifted up and then slowly and carefully placed into a pit that was slightly lower than the ground. He suddenly felt that something was wrong. In his original plan, he had planned to wait for the young noble to be buried, then wait underground for a few days before leaving to find Nank. Based on his understanding of the demons, the graveyard of this young noble's clan should be not far from the demon palace. When he saw those massive black tablets, he really did believe that this was the graveyard of the young noble's clan. The Gruel clan had always been especially massive, so they had the phrase Gruel. He believed that the gravestones of this clan would be a little larger than normal. But given the young noble's status, his burial should not have been so careless, even in a time of war. If this was not the graveyard of the Gruel clan, where was it? Why were there so many mysterious black tablets here? After a while, Zheshio found it even stranger that the coffin lid did not fall. He extended a finger to the young noble's wound, pulled his clothes to the side, and peered out of the pit. His field of vision was still limited, and the first thing he saw was a black monolith. Only when he got closer could he clearly see that it was a square monolith. The top of the monolith was curled up into a sharp point that was aimed at the sky. Zheshio's gaze followed the tip of the monolith to the sky.
In the snowy plains, he would often use this angle to look at the sky. When he was tired from chasing and killing and needed to conceal himself, he would often bury himself in the snow and open his eyes to look at the gloomy sky. He would look at it for a very long time. He knew that after looking at it for a long time, it was easy to get the misconception that high and low would be reversed, that the sky would become an abyss, and that he would float in an empty space, brimming with an uneasy feeling, just like right now. That feeling of emptiness grew stronger and stronger, ultimately becoming some sort of warning sign. On the other side of the sky, at the bottom of the abyss, there seemed to be an eye quietly watching him. Jishio felt like he had lost control of his body. Cold sweat slowly seeped out of his body, and at the same time, it seemed to take away all his courage. At the highest point of the hill that he could not see, surrounded by several thousand black monoliths, Black Robe raised her head to the sky, doing something. Suddenly, Black Robe drew back her gaze and swept it over the several thousand black monoliths. At this moment, Jeshio's heart fiercely thumped outside of its normal rhythm. At the most crucial moment, his old illness, the tide rush of blood, caused him to wake up from this nightmare that had no real content. He realized that someone was observing him. He closed his eyes, and his breathing gradually stopped, just like a real dead man. Suddenly, snow began to fall from the depths of the gloomy sky, falling on the hill and into the pit, gradually covering up all the demon corpses. The war between the humans and demons had entered its most unendurable stalemate. The plains to the south of Shualao City were filled with battles. There was not a single piece of pure land for a radius of 1,000 li, and death could occur at any moment. Both sides were exhausted to the extreme, numb to the extreme. All that was left was to see who would collapse first. The human army's sacred light crossbows were on the verge of running out, and the supplies in the rear had been unable to keep up since 10 some days ago. As for other supplies such as armaments and crystals, they had been cut off for several days. The Western Army, which was currently sweeping through the demon bases on the perimeter, had also not received any good news. The demons were also not faring much better. The majority of the armaments used to defend the city could no longer be repaired, so much so that the bravest of the human cavalry could sometimes get within 3 li of the city walls. On a certain morning, a shout of joy suddenly came from the northern plains, soon followed by the faint sound of singing. Gradually, the shouts and singing began to come from the south, transforming into thunderous cheers upon entering Shualao City. In the end, the hundreds of thousands of tribal warriors on the plains outside the city also began to howl. At the very start, the human army had noticed the movements of the demons and warily and perplexedly observed, not knowing what was going on. The cheers of the demon soldiers grew louder and louder, while the human soldiers grew more and more nervous. Divine General, He Ming gazed up at the gloomy sky and finally understood what was going on. He extended a hand to catch a snowflake drifting down. It was snowing. If nothing unexpected happens, the 4th month will be the last full moon in the Book of Heaven Selection. I will write it with all my might. Thank you, everyone. To be continued. If you like this work, I welcome you to come to Starting Point to cast a recommendation vote or monthly vote. Your support is my greatest motivation. Mobile users, please go to